Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
For the first time since the death of her parents, Emily could say she was happy. Being the bride of a successful businessman turned out to be a very good thing, but since she was a wealthy heiress, it wasn't about the money. Emily simply loved Kevin and dreamed of marrying him. There were no barriers to marriage. Emily's father, Alexander Brown, died in a plane crash 2 years ago, and terminally ill mother, Irina Brown, and even earlier. It so happened that she had no other relatives left. Therefore, the girl often thought about how great it would be to meet a good man and create a family with him. Only that's where to find him. Emily was a slender, attractive blonde with a gentle blush, with huge blue eyes and incredibly attractive, plump lips, reminiscent of ripe strawberries. It seemed easy to find a groom with such beauty. But Emily wanted to love her, not the company and the 2-story house she got from her parents. Unfortunately, these guys literally attacked the rich heiress, and she completely lost faith in men. And now, finally, Emily smiled luck in the form of a handsome and generally pleasant guy. That afternoon, she stopped in for a bite to eat at her favorite cafe, and ordering a coffee and a piece of red velvet cake, took a seat by the window as usual. "You're not busy," heard Emily in a beautiful baritone. The girl slowly looked up and saw a tall brunette of athletic build. "The cafe is half empty," Emily shrugged. "Yeah, sure," the stranger nodded and smiled disarmingly. "It's just that this is my favorite place. I apologize if I bothered you." "Go ahead and sit down," Emily replied, obeying a sudden impulse, and smiled involuntarily. "May I rejoice the boy?" "You can," Emily confirmed with a smile, and the brunette headed for the counter. "Ice cream for the prettiest girl," he announced when he returned. "By the way, my name is Kevin. What's yours?" "And I'm Emily." That's a beautiful name. And the owner of it is beautiful under the delicious ice cream, sprinkled with creamy caramel syrup. The young people talked and immediately felt a mutual sympathy. In half an hour, Emily felt as if she and Kevin had known each other for years. How else to explain that the new acquaintance seemed to guess all her thoughts and understood from half a word? And then there was more. It turned out that they liked the same movies and books. "Have I found my soulmate?" thought Emily. That's the kind of guy we could do something with. The girl was suddenly ashamed of her thoughts. Kevin was in his mid-20s or early 30s, dressed in brand-name clothes. And when he first approached, Emily had time to look at the keys to the Lexus. If he wasn't married, he must have a girlfriend.
It's the kind of guy they pick up, young Emily thought.
Kevin was staring at her, and from the look on his face, he clearly wanted to say something, but he was trying to gather his wits. "Yeah," she smiled. "I wouldn't be intrusive if I asked you out to, say, a movie." "Why not?" And yes, after the movie there was a restaurant and a walk through the night city, and so began their romance. And soon Emily realized that she would like to connect her life with this very man. But would Kevin want that? "You know what, babe? I dreamed about church today, and you're all in white, so beautiful. It's breathtaking," he once said. "Kevin, I think you and I could have a beautiful family." "Is that a suggestion?" asked Emily, a little embarrassed. "Well, let's just say it's foreplay," Kevin smiled. "For now, I have some things to take care of, and you and I will celebrate our engagement." Things were looking up for the wedding. In 2 months, the young people had never once quarreled. Day by day, Emily became more and more convinced that their taste coincided in everything. Everything they touched was idyllic. There was only one problem with Kevin and Emily's relationship. And was it a problem? Kevin was already married, and Emily found out about it by accident. After seeing her fiancé off one day, she noticed a passport on the hallway floor. Probably dropped from the bag, decided the girl, and purely machine looked into the document. And when Emily, having opened the 14th page, saw the stamp, she felt sick. What does that mean? Kevin is married, she thought in amazement. Then why all this talk about getting married? Emily spent the rest of the evening in a state of prostration, desperately thinking, why is she so unlucky? For once she'd met a decent, well-off young man, and he was married. That's why Kevin had talked about getting married, but hadn't done anything about it. After some thought, Emily decided not to jump to conclusions. The morning would be wiser in the evening. "Well, since we're getting married, you have a right to know everything about me," Kevin said, and she breathed a sigh of relief. I really was married. There was renewed doubt in the girl's soul. After all, there was no dissolution of marriage stamp, but in the case of the death of one of the spouses, it is not put there. "Your wife is dead." "I'm sorry, I didn't know." A thing of the past, Kevin nodded. "Lisa drowned. It happened a year ago. Drank a lot. I did everything I could. Went to rehab and held on. 0 results. She would hold on for a month at the most. Then she'd break down, and there was no stopping her. And one day she went in the water drunk as a skunk. Emily didn't know what to say. Condolence? It was a year ago. And if they'd met, Kevin had found the strength to move on and was trying to be happy again. Should she say she's sorry? Was she? Emily was not familiar with her lover's ex-wife, so she could not truly regret her passing. It was a pity, of course, that a young woman had gone, but that was all. Anyway, Emily's heart was relieved. She was well aware that things happened in life. She decided not to dwell on it. The important thing was that Kevin hadn't lied to her. Though there was talk of marriage, it was becoming less and less frequent. Emily decided not to rush things. Then one day she received a letter. After her father's death, Emily became the owner of a solid food company. Despite the entreaties of those who wanted to get cheaply promoted firm, Emily did not agree to sell. Brown's heiress, not without the help of his deputy and lawyer, quite quickly got into the affairs of the firm and began to manage, to the great annoyance of the skeptics who claimed that the girl would ruin the firm. Emily turned out to be an excellent manager, and no wonder. Not only did she inherit her father's business acumen, but she also had a degree in economics, and not just anywhere, but in Germany. The firm hasn't lost a single partner. In fact, it gained new ones, and that was entirely Emily's fault, so the letters were not new to her. Probably another commercial offer the young businesswoman thought with satisfaction, but this was not it. Lisa Smith, Emily muttered aloud. Lisa Smith, the last name and first name seemed vaguely familiar to her. And then it hit Emily. Kevin's last name was Smith, his wife's name was Lisa, yeah, but she was dead. Then how could that be? Coincidence? From the outside, it looked like an unintelligent prank. Come on, who needs it? Emily retorted. At the same time, the question came up, should she tell her fiancé about the mysterious message? After a moment's thought, she decided to refrain for the time being. He might get upset. But she didn't want to keep silent either. Deciding that it would be a good idea to get to the bottom of this, Emily set to work, but she couldn't think of anything else to do. Allegedly, her late wife had addressed her with a single phrase, "Watch out, not another word." It wasn't clear who or what she was supposed to be watching out for. Emily looked at her watch. There were 2.5 hours left until the end of the workday. No meetings with vendors or partners were scheduled, so she might as well leave. On leaving, she told the secretary and left the office. "Goodbye, Emily Alexandrovna." "Goodbye," she nodded absent-mindedly. Emily got into her trusty Infinity and wondered where to begin her investigation. The heiress of the grocery company suddenly imagined herself the protagonist of a detective series, and it must be said, she liked the feeling. And if I do not change my occupation, she jokingly thought to herself. The positive attitude made Emily think she should start with the cemetery. She had no idea what she'd find there, but something told her it wouldn't be a wasted trip, and so it was. Emily knew where her predecessor was buried. She'd taken Kevin there a week ago. I want to order a monument for her, and I need to figure out the dimensions. The groom explained the purpose of his visit to the cemetery. Once there, Emily walked briskly to Lisa's grave. Nothing horrible was found there. None of the vandalism she had secretly feared had occurred. The grave looked exactly as it had last time. But what then? Emily wondered. And then she answered her own question. It looked like someone had been playing a stupid prank, and she fell for it. She was playing detective. Emily heard the laughter. "No, it's not a prank," she said. Turning around, Emily saw a young man of short stature, a gravedigger, she guessed, and asked in surprise, "How do you know me?" "I know the cemetery attendant," replied evasively. "That is, not exactly. It's just that I've been told you might come." "And that's who told you?" Emily was completely confused. "You know what? Let's go to my place," the man suggested and muttered. "There's not many ears that can hear us." She was suddenly afraid. God, what have I gotten myself into, she thought with horror. Lisa Smith's grave is empty, the gravedigger began without preface. She's not there. She's alive. Alive? He nodded and told Emily a macabre story. A year ago, Tom, that was the name of the employee of this mournful place, heard a heart-rending scream, and looking around the cemetery, he found no one and thought, "Am I hallucinating?" Tom went to his gatehouse, but the scream came again. Then he realized the sound was coming from underground. "It makes my hair stand on end," the gravedigger shuddered. Tom dug up the grave. Luckily, the woman was alive. He picked the poor thing up in his arms. And just in time, Lisa fainted. About an hour later, she came to herself, Tom recalled, and then she told him that she had been buried alive. Who whispered Emily, praying to God that her terrible guess was wrong. But alas, the husband, the gravedigger, replied. Lisa begged Tom to shelter her. It's a frightful man, she whispered. I am afraid. Hide me, I beg you. And where is she now? Emily inquired. I brought Lisa to my place that day, and then we fell in love, married. We're expecting a baby, and everything would be fine. But Lisa is afraid of her ex-husband. We did some research and found out that Kevin Smith has a reputation as a black widower. He eliminates brides and then embezzles their assets. More like Bluebeard, Emily said in a shaky voice. It wasn't until a moment later that she realized she was shivering a fine tremor. Yes, I am, Tom nodded. But hasn't anyone reported him? The stunned girl asked. No, the gravedigger shook his head. They're afraid. That Smith fellow has powerful patrons. That's why Lisa has been hiding from him for a year. And recently she happened to see you two together in town and decided to warn you. But how did she get my address? Emily felt like she was having a bad dream. In the age of social media, it's not that hard, Tom hummed. That Smith guy's profile is closed, but luckily he never deleted Lisa from his friends. Apparently he wants to show he honors his late spouse's memory. Lisa turned on stealth mode. She used it to find you, and then it was a matter of technique. So the letter came to the email. The businessman's heiress frowned. She didn't want to believe her fiancé had turned out to be such a scumbag. You know, Emily the gravedigger smiled, looking out the window. You're about to hear it all firsthand. The appearance of the young pregnant woman in the gatehouse dashed all her hopes that she was dreaming, albeit a creepy dream nonetheless. So your page has an email address on it, Lisa explained with a smile. I signed with my first name, and the expectation that you know them. The hope, of course, is 50-50. But what the hell is not to joke about? At any rate, I knew the name of the unfortunate one Kevin had before me. Emily remembered that not too long ago she'd converted her profile into a business account and posted an email address for potential clients. Well, that had served her well. However, something was bugging Emily. But how come you were buried alive, she wondered. To be honest, young Mrs. Brown didn't much believe the gravedigger and his wife. Had the young, healthy woman failed to defend herself? And who knows what the two men were up to? He drugged me with some kind of drugs. Then he took me to the river and threw me down, Lisa said. I was swept ashore by the current. Yes, there was no autopsy, the young woman confirmed. Kevin enlisted his powerful patrons to ensure that there was no autopsy. Lisa was buried promptly. But apparently she was born under a lucky star. Already in the grave, the young woman came to her senses. Terrible, exclaimed Emily. She was now absolutely certain that Lisa Smith's grave was indeed empty. What to do with the groom now? Turn him in to the police. Where was the evidence against him? You should have gone to the police in the first place, she sighed. You can't prove anything now. I wouldn't be so sure of that, Lisa objected. You can prove anything if you want to. I have an idea. What kind of idea? Emily wondered, feeling the thrill of the hunt. Put up a hidden camera and watch Kevin. What will he do next? I think there's going to be a puncture sooner or later. The grocery company owner thought about it and decided Lisa's idea would most likely work well. I'll do it. They agreed to keep in touch, and Emily rolled into town. At first there was nothing on the tape, and young Mrs. Brown even felt something like disappointment. It had been a busy day. Emily was disastrously busy, and when the day was over, she had a quick call with Lisa when she got home. She collapsed into bed and fell asleep instantly. The next day, when she had a spare moment at work, Emily decided to watch the tape. When she saw Kevin on the screen, she held her breath and suddenly noticed that her fiancé had slipped something into the carafe in which Emily poured homemade lemonade. Rewinding to last night's tape, she found Kevin doing the same thing and nearly sobbed. How could I have been so thoughtless? Emily scolded herself. I could really go to the other side of the world like that. When she returned from work, she immediately poured out the contents of the decanter and rinsed it thoroughly. Emily suddenly remembered yesterday's lethargy. She was already exhausted at work, and then she had refreshed herself with her favorite drink. So it was no wonder Emily hadn't even had the energy to wash herself. She assumed that Kevin was giving her sleeping pills, and from that day on she tried to replace the contents of the carafe. Emily was careful not to let Kevin put sleeping pills in her drinks, but one day she miscalculated. Emily had no idea that Kevin had noticed her pouring the sleeping pills out of the carafe. The girl passed out. Well, it's about time, Kevin thought, and proceeded with another body removal operation. He decided to wrap the bride in a rug, Take her to the woods and bury her. Kevin remembered that both rugs were in the closet. The woods were half an hour away. The serial killer thought it would be a good idea to have a snack, so he went to the kitchen. He was appetizingly devouring scrambled eggs when suddenly his fiancee's cell phone rang. "This is the last thing I need," Kevin thought with annoyance, and decided to answer it. He was going to say that Emily had gone for a walk and forgot her cell phone, but there was silence. It had to be said that Kevin had already changed his mind about getting married. There was no need to, because he had already taken possession of everything that belonged to the bride. The lawyer had never let him down. Hearing her ex-husband's voice, Lisa became alarmed. They had called Emily every day in the morning, but the time was approaching nightfall, and there was no word from the girl. "It looks like Emily had a drink with sleeping pills in it," Lisa shared her concern with Tom. "Looks that way," her husband agreed. "Well, we should call the police." The cops arrived just in time as Adamson, panting, was pulling a heavy rug out of the pantry. The pantry was a small outbuilding adjacent to the mansion, so it was impossible to get into the house undetected. "Adamson, Kevin," a burly big man with a bushy mustache asked. The criminal was confused, but managed to pull himself together. "Yes, that's me," Kevin confirmed. "To what do I owe the honor? Shall we go inside?" "Sure. Go in quietly," he said to himself. "You're not doing anything objectionable, are you?" The police officers entered the house and immediately found an emotionless woman. "What's the matter with her?" asked another policeman, a short, thin man. "So she's dead," Adamson muttered confusedly, realizing the situation was getting out of hand. "How did they get here?" he puzzled. The mustachioed big man walked over to Emily, felt for her pulse, and immediately refuted Kevin's words. "Alive, but unconscious," he said. "Adamson's calling an ambulance." "She's alive," Adamson said, "and they're going to save her." "They will?" "Really?" The second officer nodded, "much to your regret." "Why, unfortunately?" "You know best." He grinned, squinted his eyes, and asked, "If you thought the woman was dead, why didn't you tell us and call an ambulance?" "Well, I was about to," Kevin mumbled. "Really? Why did you bring the rug?" "Well, I was just, I wanted to make a bed." "Can't you do that in the summer?" The mustachioed man snorted incredulously. "Why did the woman have to die? And by the way, who is she to you?" "Listen, you," Adamson exclaimed, gathering his courage. "I'll only answer in the presence of an attorney." "Well, that's your right. Come with us. You'll have a lawyer." A third policeman entered the house. "The witnesses have arrived," he reported. Kevin concluded that he was in charge. The policeman found a camera in the house and examined the videotapes without leaving the cash register. "Well, it's all very clear," concluded the officer of the law. Kevin Adamson was given 25 years in a maximum security penal colony. It turned out that there were several other deaths and other scams on him. "Some people are less lucky than you and me," Lisa said as the women left the courthouse. "That's true," Emily sighed. It would seem that justice had been served, and she should be happy. But why did she feel a twinge of pain in her heart? Emily's mood was not hidden from Lisa's eyes. "What's wrong with you?" she asked. "No, nothing." In fact, at this moment the girl was experiencing incredible disappointment. The man she loved turned out to be a murderer. Moreover, Kevin wanted to kill her, as he had done to 6 women. Not counting Lisa, her mind understood it all, but her heart refused to understand or accept it. "Emily, I have a suggestion," Lisa said. "Maybe we can go to some cafe? Celebrate, if you do not mind." "I'd like that." "No, guys," Emily refused. "I've got a lot of work to do, and I need to get it done today. So some other time." "Well, some other time." Emily didn't really have any urgency. She just wanted to be alone. A month passed. The soul wound was slowly but surely healing, and who knows? Maybe it would have been gone by now if it hadn't been for an accident after another hard day's work. Emily was on her way home from work and stopped by the supermarket. After filling her shopping cart to the brim, she went to the checkout. "Auntie, could you lend me some money?" Emily heard a pitiful voice. In front of her stood a skinny boy about 6 or 7 years old. "Where are your parents?" she asked. "I only have my dad. He's sick. He used to work as a longshoreman, but now he can't. He has a cold in his lungs. And I'm hungry. I haven't eaten anything since this morning." "You poor thing," she exclaimed. "Come on, I'll buy you some food. What do you like?" "Pasta," the child replied, "and buns and sausages." I see Emily nodded with a smile. Besides pasta, buns, and sausages, she bought bread, vegetables, fruit, herbs, cheese, yogurt, juice, and deli meats. "Wow, that's a lot of stuff," exclaimed the boy. "Thank you very much." "You're welcome," smiled Emily. Let's go to the drugstore. Let's get your dad some medicine. What's your name, by the way? Michael, the child said shyly. That's a beautiful name. They loaded the groceries into the trunk. Emily told the boy, Get in, I'll take you for a spin. Michael hesitated a little, but still sat down. Where do you live? Emily asked. It's not far. When Emily entered the apartment where Michael lived with his father, she almost lost her senses. The boy's dad looked exactly like Kevin. This can't be true, Emily thought, and suddenly she thought with horror. Could he have escaped from prison? When the man saw his son in the company of a beautiful, expensively dressed young woman, he was surprised. Dad, this is Aunt Emily, Michael said cheerfully. She is very good. Look how much she bought, and she bought medicine for you, too. I could see by the look in his eyes that he was terribly embarrassed. Still, he had to accept the help so that the child would not starve. When Emily was sure it wasn't Kevin, she felt better. Thank you, the man said embarrassedly and coughed. Unfortunately, I won't be able to pay you back anytime soon, but I'll pay you back when I get back to work. Oh, please, Emily waved her hand. It's a child, after all. Well, no, I can't do that. Okay, she hastened to agree. We'll talk about it later. Okay? The man, whose name was John, nodded and suddenly remarked, You're looking at me kind of weird. It's just that you remind me of someone, Emily said. So I was wondering if you two might be related. Impossible, John spread his hands. I grew up alone in an orphanage. Well, I see, Emily nodded, suddenly feeling like she was falling off her feet. Okay, guys, I've got to go. It was nice meeting you. Likewise, John replied and asked, How do I find you guys? To get my money back. What a sensitive guy, Emily thought, and handed him her business card and walked out of the apartment. On the way home, she thought about how many coincidences there were in life after all. Emily was sure that John was probably related to the man who had somehow been separated from his family. She suddenly realized she was dying to solve this mystery and decided to keep them in her sights. But that wasn't the only reason. At first, Emily had been afraid to admit it, even to herself. But the truth was obvious. Emily still loved Kevin, so why not turn her attention to a supposed twin brother? After all, consider the same man, as it turned out. The one and not the other. Despite the striking resemblance, John turned out to be the exact opposite of his convicted brother. He kept saying that he would pay Emily back for the groceries, while Kevin wanted to rip her off. She spent the next day thinking of an excuse to show up at their apartment, but she couldn't come up with anything. And when she stopped by the same supermarket after work, she saw Michael there again. Well, hello there, she said cheerfully. Hello, smiled the boy. Are you coming to see us again? Why, she asked, thinking happily. There's an excuse. And so she began to enter their apartment. Emily wondered where John's wife had gone, but she didn't ask. What if she was an alcoholic or worse? A drug addict with no parental rights? She remembered Kevin's story about his wife and grinned wryly. By the way, I should call Lisa. Emily had invited Alexander Richtov, the best doctor in town, to see John, and he'd recommended he go to the hospital. Is that necessary? The sick man asked. You see, I have a son. At any rate, it is desirable, replied the doctor, and looking at Emily, he asked, Isn't your spouse going to take care of the baby? My spouse, John stopped talking and nodded. That's clear. The wife is a businesswoman, no time for a child. Oh, those modern young families. When Emily realized the doctor had mistaken them for husband and wife, she barely contained her laughter. As for John, he blushed to the roots of his hair, though perhaps it was the hot tea he'd just drunk. You misunderstand, the patient said. We're not husband and wife. I'm raising my son alone. My wife died in childbirth. Emily shamed herself at the thought of her alcoholic wife and hastened to assure him that she would take care of Michael. We'll go to my place, she told the boy, to a big house with a pool. Really? Michael asked excitedly, and his eyes sparkled. Really, Emily smiled. Do you really live here? Exclaimed the boy as they pulled up to the mansion. Yes, just the young woman replied. And since we're here, I guess we do. I've only seen houses like this in movies, the child said simply. Are you hungry? Emily inquired. I am, Michael replied like an adult. Am I going to swim in the pool? Lunch first, then swimming. As much as your heart desires, she smiled. Suddenly, she felt like a mom and decided there was something to that feeling. John spent 10 days in the hospital, and the whole time he couldn't stop thinking about the beautiful blonde woman who had suddenly appeared in his and Michael's lives. Emily was undoubtedly very attractive, but the slender, blue-eyed, and seemingly natural blonde could boast not only looks, but intelligence. She was also kind and helpful. I think about her too much, John decided. Suddenly, he realized he was in love. The discovery did not make him happy. After all, John couldn't help but realize that he and Emily were people from different worlds, and John hadn't asked what their new acquaintance did for a living. But judging by the expensive clothes, the keys to the infinity, and the ease with which she splurged on groceries and medications, assumed she worked for a reputable company. Clearly not a rich slacker who squandered her parents', husbands, or rich lovers' money. Either way, John was no match for her, and all he had to do was thank Emily for all she'd done for them, return the money, and bow out. Yeah, but then there was Michael, who was clearly in love with her. We'll just have to wait and see, John concluded. And the day she was discharged from the hospital, Emily arrived. How's your health? She asked. And the man sensed that she really cared. Thank you. Much better, well. That's wonderful, the girl replied cheerfully. Get in. Let's go, yeah. I'd take the bus, John mumbled hesitantly. But the young woman stretched out with a laugh. You know my address. Michael's at my place. Let's go. I've ordered a celebratory dinner. Well, sit down already. Well, Michael, let's go home, John asked his son after lunch. No, declared the boy. Well, let's stay here a little longer indeed, John said, the landlady with a smile. Why don't you really stay? You can even spend the night. There's plenty of room for everyone, yes. Yes, Michael clapped his hands together. Eventually, John allowed himself to be talked into it. They enjoyed a swim in the pool and, after conferring, went for a walk. It's beautiful here, John said approvingly, looking out over the field and the small but picturesque lake. Yes, it's a paradise in summer, Emily said proudly. They returned home in the late afternoon. All three of them were hungry, so dinner was finished in a flash. And when Michael, tired from the abundance of impressions, went to bed, the hospitable hostess took out a bottle of old-aged wine from the cellar, cut cheese, fruit, and called John to the terrace. The heat's finally broken, Emily said, settling into an armchair. It sure has, nodded her guest. I wonder sometimes. We wait until summer to complain about the heat, later to complain about the heat, she repeated to herself. And the loader doesn't know those words, John. What's your education? If it's no secret, Emily asked. I'm an IT guy by training, an IT guy, she wondered. And work as a longshoreman, that's about it, John said. Work's a little tight these days. Sometimes, though, I fix computers and phones, that's crazy. John, I want to offer you a job. I'd like to find a job. I don't have any, unfortunately. But managers make good money too. Your place is where? He asked, perplexed. Didn't I tell you? I'm the director of the Smack Food Company. Have you heard of it? Well, yes. As a matter of fact, John nodded, remembering how Emily had given him her business card on the first day they met. True, John had slipped it into his pocket and safely forgotten it. Are you willing to give it a try, Emily? He said firmly. I really am eternally grateful to you for everything, but I can't accept handouts. So what handouts? Exclaimed the businesswoman. It just seemed to me that you'd like the manager's position better than the loader's. No, if you don't want it, I won't insist after all. She seems offended, John thought, not without surprise, and said aloud, all right, let's try the manager's job. It turned out to be much more interesting than being a loader, and John was doing a great job. Some, however, looked at him askew, saying that the lady boss had her eye on him and put him on the breadline. Never mind, Emily waved her hand. I'm not paying attention anyway, but what if it's true? She asked quietly. What, that I have my eye on you? The young people never realized who had made the first move. They kissed frantically and seemed unable to get enough of each other. That same evening, John and his son moved into Emily's mansion. Are we family now? Michael asked. And Emily is going to be my mom, well, if she wants to be, replied the father. Of course she wants to, muttered the boy with conviction, and John suddenly said, I'll be right out. Where are you going? Emily wondered. Wherever I need to go, he replied evasively, and ran out of the house. John returned about 20 minutes later with a bouquet of scarlet roses, and returning, he asked in a heartfelt voice, Emily, will you marry me? Yes, she answered without hesitation. Of course I will, yay, shouted Michael. The news of the impending wedding of the company owner and the new manager spread through the office faster than wildfire. That'll make him her deputy. Tom Young, one of the employees who was secretly sighing for his boss, muttered gloomily. Is that all that bothers you? Gloatingly smirked office manager Lisa, who in turn looked at Tom with a laugh. Such were the passions simmering in the office, and the lovers just enjoyed happiness. Together they raised Michael and looked forward to the wedding, which was scheduled in 2 months. If something had overshadowed Emily's happiness, it is that she never decided to tell her lover about Kevin. On the one hand, there was nothing terrible about it. There were few coincidences in life. But on the other hand, she had the feeling that their married life had begun with deception. One day, coming home from work, Emily noticed something white in the mailbox, probably from the IRS, she thought. When she looked at the return address, she felt hot. The letter was from prison, and there was only one person who could have sent it. John wasn't home. He'd gone to pick up Michael from the preschool swim class, so Emily was alone. She sat down on the living room couch and hurriedly printed out the message. "Here's admire what you've done," bitch Kevin wrote. "Do you realize my life is over?" It was as if Emily was forcing him to run scams and kill poor women. Attached to the letter was a photo of the ex-fiancé in a prison robe. Trim bald, with a cocky grin. He looked so repulsive that Emily felt nauseous. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. She barely had time to hide the letter behind the couch cushions. "Is something wrong?" John asked, noticing the look on his fiancée's face. No, she shrugged. "Everything's fine." As the evening wore on, Emily forgot all about the letter. The next day was a day off. They wanted to get a good night's sleep. It had been a long week. Michael, on the other hand, got up early and went to the living room to watch TV. The boy decided to make himself comfortable and put one of the sofa cushions under his head. Underneath it was an envelope. He twirled it in his hands, and then a picture of his daddy fell out of it. It was a picture of him dressed in some gloomy clothes. Michael had seen that in movies about cops and criminals, and for some reason, Daddy had no hair. "You awake, hero?" Dad asked. "Dad, were you bald?" Michael wondered. "I'm bald," marveled John, and his son handed him a photo from the envelope. "Good morning," Emily chimed in. But when she saw John and Michael's faces, she gloomed. "Who's that?" John asked her, sensing he was about to find out something unpleasant. That looks like your twin brother. And you've been hiding the fact that I have a brother all this time," the man exclaimed. "I wanted to say, I really did," Emily mumbled. But for some reason you didn't," John huffed. "Somehow. Yeah, if I told you why. I'm not sure you'd want to hang out with a brother like that. Should I tell you? Or is it better not to?" "Tell me," the groom said reproachfully. "I grew up in an orphanage. I've never had any relatives, not even like this, especially since we're talking about a twin brother. Better none than this one." The young woman never managed to find the words that would fully characterize the scoundrel. "There was a time I loved him. But that's in the past. I love you now, John." But it seemed their relationship was now in question. "One thing I don't understand is why you were nodding," John pondered aloud. "I, as you recall, showed up at your place quite by accident," she reminded him. "Maybe accidentally, maybe not. Either way, you knew and kept quiet." "Oh, I just couldn't make up my mind to tell you," Emily muttered in despair and got angry with herself. "Why am I making excuses?" "Dad, Mom, don't fight," Michael muttered pleadingly. "We won't," Dad promised, "because now you and I are going to get out of here." There was so much longing in John's voice that his son didn't argue. This was the second day John had indulged in libations. To think he had a twin brother who was also behind bars. "Daddy, don't drink," Michael pleaded, but his father remained deaf to his pleas. "I'm hungry," the child said with tears in his voice. "You'll find something in the refrigerator," John replied, barely able to speak, and collapsed from the stool to the floor. Michael looked in the refrigerator, but found nothing but frozen hams and a jar of pickles. He cried. When he calmed down a little, he decided to go to Emily's. She would be sure to feed him. Michael remembered that she lived in a village not far from the exit from the city. He had some change, and miraculously, enough for the bus. "Why no adults?" the conductor asked. "They'll meet me," Michael replied, and the woman nodded, "as long as the kid paid the fare." Which he did. The boy got off at the right, as it seemed to him, stop and went in the direction of the mansions, and then he realized that he got off in the wrong place. The houses were mixed with the forest, and soon Michael was horrified to find that he was lost. In addition, there was thunder and heavy rain. He was really scared. He sat down under a tree and wept bitterly. The rain ended as quickly as it had begun. It was dark outside, and Michael wondered in fear if there were wolves in the woods. "Oh my God," he heard an elderly man's voice. "What are you doing here?" "I was on my way to see Emily, and I got lost," Michael exclaimed. "And who would she be?" "Your Emily," inquired the grandfather, who turned out to be a forester. "She's so beautiful," replied the little boy through tears. "She has white hair." "A big car." "Not much," the man summarized. "Is that what you are? Let's go to my place, and I'll try to help you find your Emily." After drinking the flavored tea and homemade buns, Michael was so sleepy he wanted to go to bed. "So lie down," the forester commanded. "Where are your parents?" There was no cell phone on the boy, so there was nothing to think about contacting his father or mother. It would be nice to know for sure who Emily was, but I don't think that's going to happen either. Why would a kid run away from home anyway? I don't have a mom, Michael replied sleepily. Dad and Emily are getting married, and she's going to be my mom. Only they had a fight and Dad got drunk because of it. I see the Forester nodded profoundly. Waking up from the alcoholic oblivion and not finding his son in the apartment, John began to berate himself at the last words. God, what an idiot I am. A bloody alcoholic. This could go all the way to child welfare, Michael, he called out and went to the balcony, hoping with all his heart to find his son there. But alas, the cell phone John had recently bought Michael was lying on the table. It was already dark outside, so it was unlikely that the sun was outside. Theoretically, he could have been at one of the neighbors' houses. Emily's realization dawned on John, but of course, now that he'd cooled off, he didn't realize later what had come over him. It wasn't really that big of a deal, really. Emily simply couldn't bring herself to tell him about her brother, and he blamed her for something he didn't understand. Apparently, Emily was in a relationship with Kevin and quite possibly feared jealousy as well. He was an idiot, stirring up a storm. I'll apologize for that, John cheered and dialed Emily's number, just as long as she had Michael. Michael's lost, Emily screamed in a voice that was not her own. How could you, John thought doomfully, scold me? I deserve it. Only what good is self-abuse? How long has he been gone? John asked stiffly. I see, Emily retorted, and with metal in her voice told John to wait for her. God, you stink, she said in disgust. How are you going to work tomorrow? John smiled involuntarily. Emily was talking to him like a stern wife. He liked it an awful lot, just so long as she forgives me. But first, Michael, he thought. What's the cabin? John asked. A woodsman, I guess Emily suggested with a shrug and held out a fruit gum to him. Here, chew on your booze. They say peppermint only makes it worse. The fruity one's just fine. Thanks, John said quietly. You drunkard, the young woman shook her head reproachfully and couldn't help but smile. John realized he was forgiven and sighed in relief. When the young men entered the woodsman's cabin, Michael was sleeping peacefully on a comfortable bed. Why didn't you watch the baby? The ranger shamed them. There's a lot of idiots out there these days. It just happened, John replied. Wife John mumbled, and grandfather took a closer look at him and almost lost his mind. It can't be, he blurted out. What is it? John asked. It's just that you look just like my father when he was young. You look just like him. No, not that, he sighed. Emily agreed with him. They'd had enough of these coincidences. It's just that I recently found my twin brother under not very good circumstances. Lesnikov suddenly turned pale. Oh, God, exclaimed the elderly man, and the lovers literally felt with their skin that another secret was about to be revealed. But this time everything must be all right. A twin brother, you say? Guys, how about some tea? We haven't had any of that incredibly delicious currant drink. And the Forester, whose name was Gregory Peterson, recalled many years ago his wife gave their children to an orphanage. It was a cruel thing to do, but it wasn't that simple, he said. Mary was not well. Then Gregory went hunting and was attacked by a bear. He got a good beating from the bear, and the man thought he wasn't going to make it, but he did. Gregory Peterson was rescued by a gamekeeper. It took him 3 months to get home from a remote part of the forest. Meanwhile, his wife, convinced Gregory was dead, became depressed. One day she got on a bus and took the boys to an orphanage. But she didn't say which one, the Forester said with a sigh. You weren't looking for us, John asked. Well, if it was us, of course. I'm pretty sure it's you, Gregory Peterson said with conviction. And looking for you, of course. But Mary couldn't even explain which orphanage she'd put you in. There were several in the vicinity, in different communities, and you were nowhere to be found. I thought you were adopted. Besides, some orphanages were closed, and the kids were taken to other cities. After all, I was gone for 3 months. What happened to your wife? Emily asked. Mary was diagnosed with a severe mental disorder, and soon she was gone. The story told by the Forester could not be called positive, but John suddenly felt warm. Michael had turned up. Wasn't that a reason to rejoice? Plus, he'd found his brother and his father, and even the fact that his mother had abandoned him and Kevin like unwanted kittens didn't dampen his happiness. All three of them were silent, each thinking about something else. Dad, Emily, are you two not fighting anymore? Michael's voice broke the silence. No, my golden one, the young woman replied fondly, and everyone laughed with relief. The probability of kinship is 100%, solemnly announced the employee of the laboratory. Or did they think so? "Thank you," John thanked her with a smile. Now he had a father, and Michael had a grandfather. And it was a grandfather who had saved his grandson from spending the night in the woods. It was only Providence that had led them to each other. And John had a brother, Kevin, and, no matter how Emily looked at him, he was determined to keep in touch with him. Blood isn't water. What if he didn't want to? The bride asked. What if guys like Kevin are not interested in anything but money? We'll see, John said philosophically, and Emily realized that he was determined. But she didn't have time to worry about her ex-fiancé. First of all, today was the last fitting of the wedding dress, with which she helped her future witness Lisa. And secondly, she had a visit to the gynecologist. Yesterday, the happy bride took a pregnancy test, which showed 2 stripes. All that remained was to find out when Emily's new life was born. "Johnny, are you busy?" Emily asked. The young woman had just left the doctor's office, and she was eager to tell her fiancé the good news. "I'm always free for you," John assured her, "but as a disciplined subordinate, I'll add that I'm a little busy." "Well, that's commendable," Emily said cheerfully. "What would you say as a 2-time father-to-be?" "I say I'm the happiest man in the world," he shouted. The baby was a miracle. As blonde and blue-eyed as her mother. "She looks like a little princess," Michael remarked. He cared for his little sister in such a touching way that Emily was moved to tears. Today his son had made a cookie cake. Mary turned 1-year-old today. She's going to be a pastry chef, Grandpa Gregory, who was a frequent visitor to their home, once said. "Not the worst profession." "By the way," the daughter-in-law replied. "We'll plug into the family business." "Who's arguing?" Michael scurried busily around the house. Helping Mom set the table, soon John arrived, laden with packages from the specialty baby store. His husband entered the house with a huge pink-colored plush elephant and a bunch of balloons with painted dolls on them. The largest of them bore a glittery inscription, "Happy Birthday." Princess, the little girl, looked at all this splendor with delight, and the hearts of her parents, grandfather and brother, swooned with love and tenderness for the youngest member of the family. Kira stood at the foot of a wide automobile bridge. The sky was frowning, rain was pouring down from it. The girl's long black hair was wet and clinging to her face. But Kira didn't seem to notice it. The cars whizzed by in both directions. Someone honked at the girl, standing so dangerously on the edge of the curb she was splashed by tire spray. Again, she didn't even bat an eye and didn't try to dodge the dirty, cold shower. Kira's attention was fixed on the road where the wedding cortege would soon pass. There was no hope that the festive procession would be delayed until the rain stopped, because Kira saw everything clearly. Trouble would happen, would definitely happen exactly when it was raining, if she didn't get in her way. But Kira would do anything to prevent tragedy from happening. Kira grew up in the village. Her mother and father were already old enough when a swarthy, black-haired girl appeared in the family, so different from her parents and older brothers. Those were blonde, sturdy. Kira, on the other hand, had a frail build. On her face stood out huge, dark brown eyes and black as tar eyebrows apart. Her older brothers were grown up and independent. They lived separately in the city and came to their parents only rarely. Sometimes they brought their families to visit. Their children were just like the rest of the family, ruddy white blondes, chubby, with strong knees. Of course, Kira noticed that they were different from her own, but somehow she didn't think about it. It's not a big deal, the ginger cat also once had black kittens. But as she grew up, the girl understood and realized more and more clearly. She was too different from her relatives. And it was not only in appearance. Her parents were economical working people. All their time, all their thoughts were occupied with cleaning, cooking, gardening, housework, and yard work. Conversations revolved around these topics. Kira was interested in people, how they felt, why they acted this way and not that way. She asked her mother and father 100 questions a minute. They only waved away their inquisitive daughter and advised her to stop doing silly things. "Better the cucumbers are gone," frowned the father. "Or mop the floors in the house," her mother said. No, Kira was not a stranger to helping her parents with household chores. In her small childish hands, any business could be done, but it was not all that interested her in life. Parents did not understand their daughter. But she was perfectly understood by a woman swarthy, beautiful, young, with black, very kind eyes. It was a pity only that she lived only in Kira's dreams. For as long as the girl could remember, This woman had always dreamed of her. She did not say anything, but looked with such tenderness and love that Kira's heart immediately became warm and light. The girl often shared with her her troubles, worries, and immediately felt relieved, because this beautiful woman understood and accepted her every word. Kira knew this for sure. It was a pity that the stranger herself never said anything, but looked with such sympathy and understanding that words were not required. So Kira was not too interested in housekeeping and household chores and worries. She was drawn to the forest, to nature. She subtly felt people, their moods, thoughts, intentions. This was not the only difference between the girl and her relatives and other villagers. Kira, she could see the troubles that threatened a person, and also the little girl unmistakably determined where and what someone hurts or will soon be sick. By the age of 7, the girl realized this ability. At first, she was not surprised. She thought that everyone could do that. Then she realized, of course, her differentness, uniqueness, but much later. "Don't drink whiskey before the flight, you'll fly into the ditch," said once little Kira to Uncle Jacob, a neighbor. She had just seen what was going to happen to him when she happened to look into his eyes, saw it, and was horrified. Overturned, and soon no longer a car in a ditch. But her neighbor's body stretched out in an unnatural pose. Blood. A gruesome picture, but it could have been easily avoided. The girl had kindly warned the man. Instead of the expected gratitude, Kira got an angry rebuke. "You're still going to teach me?" Uncle Jacob hissed angrily, looking at the little neighbor with almost hatred. "I'm not old enough. My wife scolds me, her friends nag me. And now you. Well, get out of here before you get your ass kicked." Frightened Kira obediently slipped out of the neighbor's yard. He really could use physical force. He beat his sons like that. The whole street could hear them screaming. Kira felt sorry for Sam and Andy. They were her close friends. The kids had grown up together. But their parents said Uncle Jacob was doing the right thing to keep them on their toes. Kira was never touched by her mother or father. Well, she tried not to give her parents any reason to. So they didn't have a very warm relationship. Uncle Jacob did crash into a ditch and die. At the funeral, people were talking about the man's own fault. Drunk driving again. And he'd been warned many times. He'd been told. So Kira decided, having listened to the neighbors' conversations, that everyone knows how to see the danger that threatens a man. She wasn't the only one who'd warned Uncle Jacob. People had said so themselves. "Mom, Dad, I warned Uncle Jake too," she shared with her parents. "I knew this would happen too. Why didn't he listen to people?" "Don't say anything," the father glared at his daughter angrily. "People have grief, and you're still here with your reasoning." Kira saw the small troubles that could happen to people and tried to warn them. It was natural for her, even became a habit over time. For example, she timely wiped the puddle on the floor from under the refrigerator, and the mother did not slip and did not break her leg. Also, the girl detained the neighbor's little girl Isabel in her yard, just distracted her with toys. Otherwise, the girl would have run for the gate and been bitten by a dog off the chain. That would have scared her almost to death. She wouldn't talk for a long time afterwards. There were a lot of cases like that. I can't remember them all. But at the age of 12, Kira clearly realized that she had a special gift. Other people can't see the future, and they're certainly afraid of Kira's ability. So it's best to keep quiet about her. Kira was coming back from school when she saw Trixie. The girl lived with her parents on the other side of the village. She often came here to visit her friend Lydia. Trixie was not well liked in the village. "She's a slut," they said about the girl with disdain, and some with outright dislike. Kira did not know the meaning of the word at that time. "What do you mean, a slut?" Here she herself also liked to go out. She often played with children in the street, and she herself could wander around the village for hours. Kira liked forests and fields, liked roads. The girl generally dreamed of growing up soon and going around the world on foot or hitchhiking. In general, the girl did not understand why walking it's bad. And she always greeted Trixie with a friendly hello, and she often smiled at Kira. "Hello. Wait. Hello, Gypsy Beauty." Kira was often called a gypsy because of her appearance, but Trixie pronounced the word in a kind of affectionate and cheerful way. It didn't sound like a hurtful nickname from her lips. Anyway, Trixie was expecting a child, a boy. Kira had seen it long ago but hadn't voiced her thoughts because she thought Trixie knew it, and so did everyone else. The girl had seen her ability as something natural and ordinary. She thought everyone could do it. The neighbors were saying that Trixie, who was walking around, had made a baby, that no one would want her now. They spoke of her future baby as something shameful and dirty. Again, Kira was perplexed. A child is happiness, joy, light. How could one talk about a baby like that? And why didn't anyone want Trixie now? Her baby is wonderful, cute, sweet. Kira could see that clearly. On the contrary, everyone would want Trixie even more with a belly like that. That memorable day, Trixie stood leaning against the fence of the house where her girlfriend lived, smoking. I think she was still drunk. At least she smelled strong. Before she'd gotten pregnant, Trixie had often drank and smoked, but she'd abstained because of the baby. But today, for some reason, she snapped. Maybe it wasn't just tonight. It looked like Trixie had been like this for days. Kira approached her and froze. She saw that the baby in Trixie's belly was choking. He was no longer smiling, no longer happy, no longer waiting in joyful anticipation of meeting a huge and interesting world. This little guy is clinging to life with all his might. Trixie's poisoning him right now. How? Why? Can't Trixie see her own son suffering? Trixie, stop it, Kira pleaded, looking into Trixie's cloudy, reddened eyes. What are you doing? The woman wondered. Throw the cigarette away. Your baby's choking. Another moralist, the mother-to-be, rolled her eyes languidly. Why don't you go about your business? I've got plenty of educators already. Your nose isn't old enough to be smart. But Kira couldn't leave. Who would help the baby then? The girl first persuaded Trixie to give up her cigarette. She lazily waved it away. Then Kira, realizing that words would have no effect, snatched the cigarette right out of the unsuspecting Trixie's hands and threw it into the grass. That's enough. Your baby is suffocating. He's dying. You need to go to the hospital. You little shit. Trixie couldn't help herself, slapping Kira with a resounding slap. What the hell are you doing? Kira's cheek was burning with fire, but she continued to coax Trixie. Your baby's not well. I can see that. You love him, don't you? I know, Trixie. Go to the doctor as soon as possible. Give me a break, Trixie yelled. She had completely lost her temper by now. Get out of here, Trixie hissed. The baby is dying. Please go to the doctor. He's going to die soon, isn't he? Kira sobbed, smearing tears on her face. Trixie spun Kira around by her shoulders and pushed her roughly in the back. Just then, Amelia, Trixie's girlfriend, appeared on the porch. What do you have here? She asked in surprise. Oh, Kira's putting on a show. Come on, let's go, or we'll be late for the movie. And the girls, chatting about something, wandered towards the local movie theater. Kira knew that today they were showing some comedy not for children. The girl followed Amelia and Trixie all the way to the movie theater, begging, pleading, crying. The girls laughed at her in the company of her friend. Trixie no longer behaved aggressively. Kira's behavior suddenly amused her. Trixie was having fun while the baby inside her suffered unbearably. Kira could do nothing, absolutely nothing to help it. She simply didn't have the strength to drag the adult Trixie to the hospital. And that made the girl's soul ache. At home, she immediately rushed to her room, fell face down on her bed, and burst into tears. Parents did not bother the girl, did not prevent her from crying her feelings simply because they did not care. She didn't bother them, so be it. They treated their older sons quite differently. They asked about their affairs and life in the city with interest. They tried to please them in everything, smiled warmly, and, most importantly, looked at them with such tenderness and love that Kira had never seen in their eyes towards herself. Only she looked at her like that woman who comes in dreams. And today she was dreaming. After all, Kira needs someone's support, even if it is this wonderful woman who lives only in her dreams. It was that day that Kira realized a thing that struck her to the core. Trixie simply didn't see what was happening to her baby. She's a kind person, after all. Trixie, even though she sometimes gets angry and swears. And so does Amelia. She looked at her friend and didn't see the danger to her baby. So they both saw nothing, and neither did the others. Kira began to ponder. remembering some incidents from her life, and came to a stunning conclusion: she has a unique ability. She is very different from the others. The others simply do not see, do not understand what is available to her, Kira. This information was still to be digested, and to understand what to do with all this further. A week later, when Kira was doing her homework in her room, her furious mother burst in on her. "What on earth are you doing?" she exclaimed. The woman's eyes burned with angry fire. She resolutely approached her daughter, grabbed her by her thick braid, yanked her from her chair. The girl fell straight to the floor. This had never happened before. Kira had tears spurting from her eyes. It was too painful and unexpected. Her parents had never laid a finger on her before. What on earth was going on? What had she done to deserve this outburst of rage from her mother? It soon became clearer. And why did Trixie curse the child? "Answer me." "I didn't," Kira sobbed. "How didn't you?" There are plenty of witnesses. Both Amelia, Trixie's friend, heard, and the neighbor Grandma Mary. She was out in the yard fiddling at the time. People say you wish Trixie bad for that kid, and now he's dead. She's such a trashy blabbermouth. I just wanted to warn her that the baby wasn't well, that she needed to go to the hospital, Kira tried to explain. He was suffocating in her stomach. "How would you know, you gypsy brat?" What Kira slammed her eyes shut. She was jokingly called a gypsy by many in the village. But her parents didn't like it, and they never said that about their daughter. So Kira took her mother's words very seriously. "It would be better, really, if we hadn't taken you. Why such problems in your old age?" Yes, I felt sorry for the tiny girl, abandoned. Karina, from the abundance of information and overwhelming emotions, lost consciousness, just blacked out. She came to herself on her bed. Her mother and father were sitting next to her. Both of them looked worried about her, about Kira. It was even pleasant, a little. But then the memories came over the girl, and she felt defenseless and alone in the world again. "Am I not your own daughter?" Kira first inquired. "Am I really a gypsy or something?" Her mother silently shifted her gaze to the wall. Her father shook his head slowly. "We were going to tell you that later when you're older." Mother, you see, couldn't help herself. She was scared. Scared here. When the girl you've raised since she was a baby says such scary things to people. "I wanted to warn Trixie," Kira tried to explain. "She wouldn't listen to me. And you took me from the orphanage. Is that how it works?" "You weren't taken to an orphanage by your own blood relatives." Her mother pursed her lips dismissively. It was evident that the mention of Kira's relatives displeased her. "They abandoned the newborn right in the field. Just like that, a defenseless infant in some dirty rags. They didn't need you there. They got rid of you. They probably thought you'd die alone in the field." Why die? At once the girl did not want to believe such terrible things. "Clearly no one loved you there," the father entered the conversation. "They left you in the middle of a field at night, away from people. Obviously the calculation was that you would either freeze or starve to death. What's it like out there? It's wild. No one can hear you if you shout or scream, unless a beast comes out of the forest." "You've been abandoned," the mother confirmed. "I found out later that gypsy girls are not particularly valued, so they got rid of the burden. They just threw them away like they didn't need them. They're wild, uneducated people, and it's a common thing for them." "And you seem to have been born under a lucky star," father spoke again. "I was riding through that field that day, riding a new stallion, Bold. He smelled you. He roared and kicked his hooves. I thought at first a wolf must have run by recently. That's why the horse got worried. No, the bold one led me straight to you." A very unreal picture appeared to the eyes of the astonished man, a baby lying in the grass, wrapped in dirty scraps of cloth. It was obvious that the baby had been here for a long time. The baby did not even have the strength to scream. Later it turned out that the infant had blown his voice to a hoarse pitch. Of course, the man picked up the baby and quickly rushed home. His wife took in the crumb, carefully nursed him. She had long dreamed of grandchildren. The sons grew up and moved away. They were all building careers. They didn't think about children yet. But their mother missed the babies so much. She unwrapped the baby and shrieked with joy. It was a girl, and the woman had always wanted a daughter. She gave birth to 3 sons, each time hoping for a miracle. But no, she and her husband only had boys. And suddenly she had such a pretty little girl. "Shall we keep it?" she tentatively suggested to her husband. He was against it at first, but the wife was able to persuade, and the influence on her husband had a great deal. So the little girl remained in the family of the man who found her in the field and saved her from certain death. The spouses formalized the adoption, and as it should be, the documents were in order. They named the girl Kira. Of course, the adoptive mother, once dreaming of a daughter, thought up for her quite different names, especially like Megan and Deji, but for the swarthy girl needed something else. She didn't look like Megan, and she didn't look like Deji either. And so the girl became Kira. She was swarthy, black, and had a spot on her shoulder in the shape of Africa. What a Megan, her mother couldn't help smiling. Kira looked at her birthmark for some reason. Indeed, its outline was very similar to the African continent. The girl was embarrassed by this birthmark and tried to hide it from people's eyes. "People discouraged us," of course, continued the father. "They judged us, saying, 'Why do you need a gypsy child?' They warned us that genes are a strong thing. But we thought, what difference does it make who gave birth to the child? The main thing is who raised the child and how. We thought you'd be our helper, a good, sweet girl, like Hannah or Isabel. Genes, it turns out, mean more than upbringing." Mother shook her head sorrowfully. "You're a wild one. What kind of a fool are you growing up to be? Just now you're doing well in your studies. That's where you're good. And the rest. Why do you have to say such horrible things?" Trixie said that, "I know it's just a coincidence." "Well, you couldn't help yourself. You said something you didn't mean. I didn't know your words had that kind of power. Coincidence. Only her baby really did die in the womb. They'll think you're a peeping Tom, and they'll blame you. A lot of people in the village know you're from a Tabor, so how can we live? How can my father and I face people now?" Kira wanted to object. She wanted to explain to her parents that she saw how hard it was for the baby in her belly. That's why she tried to warn them. But suddenly the girl clearly realized that it is not worth it. She will not be understood. She is different, alien. And it's not even that Kira is not related by blood to her father and mother. The girl for the first time clearly realized she has a unique gift, and other people, they can't do that. And Kira's ability scares them. And that's why you have to keep your mouth shut. Keep quiet, keep your head down. Otherwise you'll get in trouble. Recognition of parents, reaction of people, all this forced Kira to become more secretive and mature. Now she was often in her own thoughts, looked outwardly withdrawn and aloof. Neighbors since then squinted at the girl with distrust and even forbade their children to communicate with her. Kira was not particularly upset by this. She used to love to walk alone in the woods and fields, and now she was always disappearing somewhere. There, among birches and pines, it was much easier and more pleasant for her than among people. The gap between her and the others was growing wider and wider. Well, at least now it was clear why her own parents treated her so badly. She was just a stranger to them. They wanted an obedient assistant. They took an abandoned gypsy girl. She wasn't what they wanted. A disappointment. I feel a little sorry for them. Time passed. Kira graduated from high school. She got straight A's on her diploma. Teachers advised the girl to try to go to college in the city. She gladly agreed, because Kira saw the sick places of people. A medic, she could become just wonderful. Yes, and she liked to help others, to alleviate their suffering. She also wanted to leave the village as soon as possible. Everyone here was wary of her. Even her parents were distant. Kira thought that they had regretted their decision to take the gypsy girl more than once, but they were too responsible and conscientious people to get rid of their adopted daughter and give her to an orphanage. So everyone was relieved when Kira finally left her father's home. In the city, the girl from the village was given a room in a dormitory. It was hard, of course, to get used to a new life. But it was also interesting. Nobody knew Kira here in the city. People around her were friendly, without any prejudice. But Kira herself was smarter now. She kept silent about her gift and discreetly warned the small troubles that were to happen to her new friends. Kira went to school, got her diploma, but she couldn't find a job in her specialty. Employers wanted experience. And where would a college student from yesterday get that? Kira sat at the train station waiting for her train. She was ready to cry with despair. She needs to return home to the village, where she is not loved and not expected, to the place from which she escaped a few years ago to a happy, as it seemed to her, life. But the girl had no way out. She never got a job. She had nowhere to live. She couldn't even buy food. They stopped paying her scholarship a long time ago. So she's been scraping by on odd jobs lately so she doesn't starve to death. She scrubbed floors somewhere or washed dishes in a restaurant. She couldn't get any other jobs. You had to have goodwill everywhere, even to work as a waitress in a bar. So Kira came home. At least there was a roof over her head. And her mother said there were vacancies on the farm. Kira, who dreamed of treating people, would have to work as a milkmaid. Was it worth it to study in the city for so many years? But where to go? The worst of all was alienation. People were still afraid of her and shunned her. And her parents were not thrilled with the news that her adopted daughter was coming home. They didn't even hide it particularly. Kira sat on a suitcase right on the platform, because all the benches and benches were long occupied. It's summer. People are in a hurry to go on vacation. Two girls a little older than her approached her. One of them, a little embarrassed, said in a quiet, shy voice, "And you are a gypsy. Tell me a fortune. I'll pay." Kira was taken aback. In the village, her gift was considered a curse, and she herself was treated warily. This girl, on the contrary, was willing to pay to find out the truth about herself. Kira needed money. She spent her savings on the ticket, barely scraping together the necessary amount. If the girl paid, Kira would at least buy a bun and coffee at the local cafeteria. The thought of fresh pastries made her mouth fill with saliva, so she agreed. "Yes, I'm a gypsy." Kira smiled at the girls. "What would you like to know?" "When am I getting married?" the girl asked. Her eyes burned with curiosity at that. "Do you need to see my palm?" No, Kira smiled. She didn't need a palm. Much more informative were the eyes of the interlocutor. It was through them that she most often learned the truth about people. Well, or their favorite things that people had recently touched. "No, I can't say that," Kira replied. "It depends on a lot of factors, a lot of variations of events. But what I can say for sure is that your tooth is going to hurt soon, and very badly. Even pills won't help. Are you going anywhere right now?" "Not now," the girl answered confusedly. "We just came to get our tickets, and we're leaving tomorrow." "Then I strongly advise you to see a doctor as soon as possible. Otherwise the trip will turn out to be a torment," Kira replied. She thought that the girl would not like her prediction, because she had asked her about something else. But the girl suddenly smiled, thanked her, and handed Kira a crisp bill which could be used not only for a bun and coffee, but also for something more serious. A full meal at a cafe, for example. "No way, that's too much," Kira marveled. "Some gypsy, you are wrong." Only the girls moved away from Kira as a pregnant woman immediately jumped up to her. "I saw you told the girl's fortune. Can you help me?" "Depends on what you're interested in." Kira stretched out in surprise. What a rush. "Tell me, please, can you see who I'm expecting? A boy or a girl?" Kira smiled. "Of course I can see it. You have both a boy and a girl in there," Kira replied. "Didn't you know you were carrying twins?" The woman smiled and immediately slipped a bill into Kira's hand. "Is this much enough?" "Of course I knew. It was just a test to see if you were a real fortune teller or a charlatan." "Just don't take offense." "Okay," Kira wasn't offended. On the contrary, she was amused by the woman's cunning. "What I wanted to know is this. Is my husband cheating on me?" the woman asked. Kira looked more closely at her interlocutor. She was anxiously waiting for an answer. She was rubbing the strap of her bag with her fingers, shifting from foot to foot. Of course, Kira could not see whether this future mother of twins was faithful to her husband. But she did notice something dangerous, a darkening in the heart area. "I don't know about the husband, sorry, but you should definitely see a cardiologist. There's something wrong with your heart. Don't freak out. It might not be anything serious, but it's worth getting checked out," Kira said. "Thank you." The woman clearly took Kira's words seriously, I'll definitely go now. Do you see anything about your husband at all? No, but your kids are healthy, and the road will be safe and easy for you. That's all I can say for now. The woman nodded, paid Kira, and left. After that, people who had been attracted by the previous clients still came to her. Kira sent some to the doctor, seeing their health problems. Some were advised not to hurry with their trip, as there was trouble waiting for them on the road. The gift that so frightened everyone in her village was considered a boon here. People said nice words to Kira, paid her money. By the time the train arrived, she had enough money to rent an apartment for a whole month. The train was boarding, and Kira still did not hurry to the aisle. She sat on the platform and thought maybe she shouldn't go to the village. She had made a lot of money today in just an hour. Of course, it would not always be so lucky, but it's definitely enough to live on. And there is no need to return to a place where you are not loved, even feared, where you are accused of all the deadly sins and considered a gypsy brat. It's very unpleasant to feel like some kind of walking bad omen. People don't want to make eye contact. They say hello through their teeth. She's better off staying in town. Help people. For now. And then maybe she'll get a job in a hospital specialty. So Kira stayed. A few years passed. Kira, as she had once dreamed, worked as a nurse in the hospital. Patients loved her for her cheerful disposition and light hand. In the mornings, the queue for injections lined up just to her. All clients from us repel, joked the other nurses. And doctors also listened to Kira. The hospital was already legendary for her intuition. "To what a gut you have," Jacob, the head of the department, marveled. "You should go to the academy." "You should. You'll make a great doctor." But Kira didn't rule out that possibility. But she didn't want to be away from her patients, even for the sake of her studies. She was afraid that they wouldn't be able to help anyone here without her. Still, Kira had a rare gift. It had to be put to good use. She still dreamed of a gray-haired woman with kind black eyes. True, now it happened less often than in her childhood. After every such dream, Kira got up feeling energized and full of strength. This woman seemed to energize her, encourage her. Kira got used to her and missed her if she didn't show up for a long time. But she always knew that time would pass and she would come again and she wouldn't go anywhere. It was just a pity that the woman didn't speak. Kira would have liked to ask her a lot of questions, but Kira herself couldn't tell her anything in these dreams. Or rather, she said so, but she saw that her words could not be heard by the woman. The girl understood. These were not just dreams, it was something more. And what? Perhaps someone from her tabor could explain it to her. But where to find them now? And is it necessary? The gypsies had left her in the middle of the field, hoping she would die. Kira no longer worked as a fortune teller. It helped her stay afloat in the city until she found a job. But fortune telling took a lot of time and energy. And people were different. Some listened to what she said, some laughed at it. For some it was all just entertainment, but Kira still managed to prevent several serious tragedies. Once she noticed a stroke in a woman traveling with 2 small children and called her an ambulance right at the station. It's scary to think what would have happened if everything had happened on the road. The young woman would not have been saved, and her children would have remained orphans. After all, the mother raised them alone. Another time, Kira strictly forbade a teenage girl to get into a hitchhiker because she saw her future. If that had happened, the girl would never have been found. It was good that this young person could not see what appeared before Kira's mental gaze. A frightening, simply terrifying picture, but a superficial description was enough for the girl. Kira herself called her an official cab and did not even take money for the fortune-telling. She offered the girl to pay for the ride on a trusted transportation. And the girl only wanted to know if Trixie would get into theater school or fail. Kira couldn't tell her that. But she could see the dreadful and imminent trouble that was about to befall her by barely touching her sleeve. Kira often grew tired of this gift of hers of seeing other people's fates, sometimes hard, sometimes tragic, and not being able to save the person in most cases. It's hard. It's impossible to get used to. That's why Kira tried not to look people in the eye or touch their things unnecessarily. Otherwise, emotional exhaustion is inevitable. Gradually, year after year, Kira learned to treat her gift in such a way that it would not harm her. It happened on a Saturday morning. For some reason, Kira couldn't sleep for a long time. Although she had stayed up late the night before with her friends at the bar, the girl thought that she would lie in bed until at least lunchtime. But no, some unknown force tore her from her pillow and drove her outside. It happened sometimes. And it almost always ended up with Kira pulling someone out of serious trouble. As was always the case in these situations, the African-shaped birthmark on her shoulder hurt a little. The very one that the girl didn't like to show for some reason. Kira sighed and put on a long light sundress. It was summer. She didn't put her hair up. She went with her hair down. There was no time. It was fine as it was. The weather was not suitable for a walk. The sky was gloomy. It was going to start raining soon, maybe even a downpour. Kira hadn't brought an umbrella, not to go back home to get it. There was no time for that. The force continued to drive the girl forward. Kira realized she had to hurry. It was useless to argue with the invisible force. Sometimes Kira tried to resist it, but it didn't work. In the end, she still broke away from her seat, dropped all the things she tried to distract herself with, and ran away to the silent but very strong call. Sometimes the girl wondered what it was. Maybe she was being used for her own purposes by fate itself. I wonder if there are still such people on Earth. I wish I could meet a colleague with a gift. There weren't many people on the streets. It was a Saturday morning. The weather was overcast. Rare passers-by met on the girl's way. They threw interested glances at Kira and quickly averted their eyes. The girl realized that she looked very exotic. The appearance of a gypsy, loose black hair, and a floor-length sundress. A kind of gypsy girl from the movie. Some outfits and hairstyles emphasized the unusual appearance of Kira. That's why she preferred jeans and t-shirts in everyday life, not to stand out. But today it turned out to dress like this. Apparently this mysterious force, and Kira did not always have time to think about their actions. And now she had jumped out of the house and the first thing that came to hand. Kira walked through the park. In the distance, she could already hear the muffled rumblings of thunder. Great. I didn't want to get caught in a summer thunderstorm. It began to drizzle from the sky. It was still a weak rain which could be ignored. It felt fresh right away. It was even easier to breathe. It smelled of wet leaves of asphalt. The girl breathed a full breath. She wanted to stop and look around. She loved nature in the rain. And here in the park was so beautiful, but it was impossible to argue with the force. And now the girl hurried onward with a confident step. At such moments, Kira did not feel tired and did not feel time. The girl noted that she had already left the city center behind. Though it usually took at least 20 minutes to get there by bus, in a normal state, Kira would have collapsed from fatigue. So many kilometers on her feet, but not now. And now, finally, Kira reached the square in front of the city registry office. The asphalt was already strewn with rose petals. Probably several registrations had already taken place here since morning. The parking lot was crowded with cars, many of them decorated with ribbons and balloons. Typical wedding corteges. Here and there stood groups of tense and cheerful people, all understandable guests and relatives of the newlyweds. They were talking, laughing, drinking. There was a sense of celebration everywhere. Kira, too, was imbued with it for a moment. She almost forgot why she was here. Someday Kira would have it too, a white dress, a handsome fiancé, and then a cozy family life, children. The girl dreamed of it, wanted family happiness. The force no longer drove her forward. Perhaps she should help someone here. But who? Kira, looking around, searched for that very person. She recognizes him or her by the look in his eyes. It's like a flash. Suddenly, Kira's attention was drawn to a beautiful bouquet, obviously from an expensive flower store. It was lying alone, somehow unnoticed by anyone, not far from the parking lot. Stylish, delicate, tied with a narrow satin ribbon of pale pink color. Kira suddenly realized that she really wanted to hold it in her hands. There was an irresistible desire to take the bouquet, to pick it up. It was hard to watch such beauty lying on the asphalt. The girl approached the bouquet, bent down, and only Kira touched it. As in her eyes, bright flashes began to flash pictures one after another, as in a diafilm. More often than not, the future and the past came to her like that. Kira watched carefully, trying not to miss anything. The happy newlyweds descended from the porch of the registry office, accompanied by their dressed-up guests. The bride is simply charming. Long blonde curls are crowned with a graceful tiara. A wedding dress in Greek style beautifully encircles a slender figure. The groom leads her by the right hand. In the left hand of the girl clutched the berry bouquet that will soon be on the asphalt. Through again a flash, a change of picture. The bride sits in a car decorated with balloons and flowers. The groom gallantly opens the door in front of her, intending, apparently, to sit down next. At this time, the bouquet falls out of the girl's hand. In the turmoil, she simply does not notice it. Next picture. The wedding cortege moves away, and the bouquet remains alone, lying next to the parking lot, unnoticed by anyone. Kira realized the young people and their guests had gone to take pictures at the memorable places of the city. It was a long tradition of local newlyweds to visit familiar, but very beautiful locations. But the visions did not end there. Now they were in less vivid color. The muted hues were a sign that Kira was seeing the future, something that hasn't happened yet but will happen if she doesn't intervene. A terrible picture appeared before her eyes, truly terrible. A wide highway bridge. Kira recognized the place. The cars from the motorcade were parked along the sides, so they were still decorated with ribbons and flowers. But the guests getting out of their cars are no longer smiling. There is confusion and fear on their faces. Some are as pale as a sheet. Some are sobbing. They look in the same direction. From the sky is gloomy, almost autumnal, pouring heavy rain. Even lightning flashes somewhere in the distance. And it seems impossible to make out anything specific in the picture. But Kira realized at once something terrible had happened, and soon she would realize what it was. A change of frame. And now Kira sees a car, the same car in which the groom recently put the bride. But it's hard to recognize it now. It's so disfigured. A little farther away you can see the culprit of the terrible accident. It was a huge truck. After the Kamaz flew out on the oncoming road and collided with the car of the bride and groom, it crashed into a pole. The driver got out of the cab, squatted down next to the wheel, and covered his face with both hands. He must have realized by now what he had done. And again the picture changed. Now the damaged car appeared before Kira close up, and the girl could not refrain from screaming. She saw the bride. Urisa and Pay smile in the car. She lay on the pavement, her neck unnaturally twisted, her beautiful white dress bloodied. Nearby, the groom pressed against the chest of the mangled metal. In his eyes understanding, pain, unbearable suffering. The guy smashed his head and probably broke his arm, but he is alive and will live. But his beloved will not return. And the realization of this fact presses him to the ground. And all around him are the guests. Some woman, probably the mother of the unfortunate girl, is devoid of feelings. She is supported on both sides. So much pain, so much fear. Kira's heart clenched with horror. The girl blinked. The vision vanished. Kira looked at the bouquet in her hands. Is this the misfortune she must prevent? That's what the unknown force had gotten her out of bed so early for. Kira didn't know why this force protects some and is completely indifferent to others. Perhaps there are cases of predestination. They have long been written into the history of the world, and there are no options. But sometimes fate gives people a chance, and then Kira becomes a kind of instrument guide. At least that's how the girl explained it all to herself. Kira hurried to that very automobile bridge. She knew that she had time, but not much. There was no need to delay after all. It had started to rain. The light drizzle that had caught Kira in the park had turned into a full-blown downpour. Lightning flashes cut through the sky from time to time. Kira was quickly soaked to the skin. Her long hair clung to her face. Her sundress, weighed down by the water, made it hard to walk. She probably didn't look her best. Perhaps no one would listen to her. They'd think she was crazy or begging. But Kira she must at least try to prevent a tragedy. The beautiful blonde girl with the sweet smile should stay alive. She can have wonderful, beautiful children. She can bring much more goodness and happiness to this world, just as long as she makes it. And there it is, that bridge. It's pouring from the sky, just like in Kira's recent visions. The girl stood by the side of the road, at the foot of the bridge. She gazed carefully into the distance. Soon, very soon, the wedding cortege would appear, and the moment of truth would come. Kira must save the bride. She had to. Finally, she caught a glimpse of it, a fancy car. The bride and groom were in it. Behind them came a tail of decorated cars. Kira recognized them. She had seen it all before, though she had never met them before. The cortege was getting closer and closer, and now the first car was entering the bridge. Kira jumped out in front, left the safety of the curb, and found herself right in the roadway, in the path of the car. Brakes squealed. The young man driver, probably a friend of the groom, rolled down his window and began to shower Kira with curses. Behind his back, the girl saw the faces of the bride and groom. They were smiling. That was the mood. Kira couldn't help but smile too, despite the seriousness of the situation. "Oh, you're completely nuts, you girl. Get out of here now," shouted the driver, but Kira didn't leave. It was too early to leave. She held up the motorcade. The guests stopped too, waiting for the situation to be resolved. But this delay was too short-term. It would not change anything drastically. Some of the guests were already rushing to Kira. Two men in smart shirts and with faces twisted with rage. Kira had no doubt that they would try to get her out of the way by force. Well, let them try. So they won't succeed. Kira was being controlled by a far more powerful force than these two. They won't move her, though it would probably be unpleasant, of course. The men grabbed Kira by the arms and dragged her toward the curb. The girl struggled and fought back with her whole body, growled and screamed, tried to bite the men's hands. They looked at each other in surprise. Both of them were of strong build and could not understand why suddenly they could not get the fragile girl out of the way. The battle lasted for about 15 to 20 seconds. And then Kira saw a truck, the same one, rushing past them at full speed. It flew straight into the oncoming traffic. Fortunately, there were no other cars on the way, and the driver had time to swerve. And if it hadn't been for Kira, the truck might have hit the car with the bride and groom, except that no one realized or noticed it. And Kira didn't need fame and recognition. The main thing is that the bride is alive and well. As soon as the truck passed the bridge, the girl calmly let herself be led away from the road. "You wretched tramp," angrily threw to Kira one of the men. He was completely soaked in the rain and rightly blamed Kira for it. She only smiled. She was not used to hearing such insults. The main thing is that the bride is out of danger now. She will live. She will be happy. A happy future awaits the newlyweds. They really love each other. You can see it in their eyes clearly. That means everything will be fine. The guests settled into their cars and the motorcade resumed driving. And only then Kira noticed him, a handsome, swarthy man with kind black eyes. His face somehow seemed very pleasant and vaguely familiar. It was one of the guests. He wore a dress shirt of a soft lavender color, and his shoes were polished to a shine. He was obviously going to a banquet. Only his car, parked at the curb, was not decorated with balloons. But there were many such cars in the motorcade. Not everyone likes to dress up their transportation. The man slowly began to approach Kira. He looked carefully and with interest into her face. And he didn't care at all about the rain. It was as if this man did not notice that he was soaked to the skin. Kira thought that one of the guests had decided to stay to punish her for the delay, but she immediately dismissed the thought. The man's eyes were too kind. "Well, hello, beautiful," spoke the man, addressing Kira. "Don't be afraid of me." "I'm not afraid." "I know if you are. I think you see a great deal ahead, and that's why you don't have much fear." Kira felt as if struck by lightning. Does he know about her gift? Or guesses what was even going on here right now? "I figured it out," the man continued. "I saw that truck. If he hadn't stopped the cars, the bride and groom's car would have been damaged, and someone would have been killed. The newlyweds. Just the bride. But the groom wouldn't have been able to live afterward either," Kira replied. Would have blamed himself, and would have fallen seriously ill soon afterward. "And now they're both alive and happy," Kira's interlocutor summarized. "I should probably introduce myself. My name is Timmy." "Kira," the girl replied. "Kira is a beautiful name and it suits you. Listen, it's raining like this. "We're soaking wet. You're soaking wet. Let's go to my car. I'll turn on the heater and give you a towel." In a car with a stranger. Kira eyed Timmy suspiciously, trying to see anything suspicious in him. But there was nothing to catch her eye. "You can see right through me, can't you?" The man smiled slyly. Kira thought and nodded. There was no point in denying it. This man seemed to see right through her too, and he was perfectly safe. In the car, Timmy handed Kira a terracloth towel. The girl wiped her hair, hands, face, and soaked sundress. The heater was pleasantly warming the cabin. At this temperature, everything would dry quickly. Kira enjoyed the long-awaited warmth. "You know, I need to make sure you're this anyway. Do you happen to have a special birthmark on your shoulder?" Kira flinched. But how would he know that? The girl didn't like to show off her birthmark. She didn't know why, but she hid it all the time. But here she moved the strap of her sundress, so Timmy could see what he was interested in. "It's you," the man smiled. Kira even thought there were tears glistening in his eyes. "Wow, you found yourself. After all these years, Camellia will be happy." Kira tried to figure out from the man's eyes what was going on, but she couldn't read anything in them. It happened. Not everything was revealed to Kira. "Maybe you can explain to me what's going on," the girl asked. "I don't understand anything at all." Of course, the story is a very long, convoluted one, but you should know it. The main thing is that you have found yourself. Everything will be all right now, Timmy began his story. Timmy and his younger sister Camellia were born and raised in the community. Their father died early. Timmy was barely 5 years old at the time. Camellia was just a baby, only 2 years old. She didn't remember her parents. 3 years later, the children's mother died, leaving them orphans. The community, of course, did not abandon them. But the situation of orphans in it was unenviable. The children were forced to work hard to justify their existence. They were fed, but they hardly saw sweets, nor did they see affection. The only person who was kind to the siblings was still the old woman Zendaya. She had once been very friendly with Timmy and Camelia's own grandmother. She considered her almost a sister, so she treated her old friend's grandchildren with warmth and care. But her kind words meant a lot to the children. Zendaya tried to teach the little ones how to read and write. Timmy picked up everything at the drop of a hat. He learned to read and write, and he counted well. He was a smart kid, too. He liked his studies very much. Camellia didn't like lessons, but she saw people's illnesses and was able to warn them of trouble in advance, so that they had time to take some measures. For this gift, Camellia was valued in the community. True, it only meant more work for the girl. There were no allowances for her labors. "It's just like mine," Kira couldn't help but shout. "I, too, see the diseases and troubles that threaten people. Like today." "Of course you do," Timmy smiled. "You're Camelia's own daughter, aren't you?" "Yes, that's the gift that's passed down from mother to daughter." The man pulled out his passport. It held a picture of his sister. Kira looked at the picture and gasped. The photo was of the same dark-haired woman she had seen in her dreams all these years. "Recognize her?" The man smiled contentedly. "You bet you do. You've met in dreams, haven't you? She was the one who came to see you. She's been watching over you, supporting you as best she could." "So this is Mom, that woman from the dreams?" "Yes, girl, that's your mommy." Camellia and Timmy grew up quickly. No one picked on Timmy. Who cared about a bum? A bum. Camellia, on the other hand, was to be married to an old widower. Of course, the girl was horrified at the prospect, but no one had any intention of asking her. At that time, the community was near a town, and Camellia met a young man at the market. Feelings flared up between them. The young man even wanted to steal away his beloved. But the community found out about it and did something to him. Either a severe beating or something worse. And they kept Camellia locked up so she wouldn't interfere or warn the boy. Timmy smuggled her food and water in there without anyone seeing. So the congregation left the place and moved on. They were getting ready for the wedding of Camellia and the widower. And then it turned out that Camellia was expecting a child. The timing suggested that the father was the same guy. The fetus was tried to be eradicated. Camellia herself wanted to keep the baby and fought back violently. They had to twist her, hold her down, but no potions worked on the child. A strong child, the women said. No other way than a special gift. It was decided to leave her alone for a while, to wait for the birth. The wedding, of course, was postponed. The widower did not want to take a bride in a state, as he put it. And then came the day when Camellia realized, very soon she will meet with a child. At that moment, the young mother already knew that she was carrying a girl on her heart, saw her in a dream, and she thought of a name for her. It's beautiful. Vita, Timmy smiled. We were all hoping the elders would let us keep the baby girl in the community, let her grow up with the other local orphans. We've got quite a few of them, but it didn't work out. Upon seeing the newborn girl, the midwife who delivered Camellia's baby changed her face. There it is, the mark, the woman said clearly. Indeed, the baby girl had an African-shaped birthmark on her shoulder, a mark of power. This startled the community. They had never encountered such power before. The unknown was frightening, as well as the girl's possible revenge. After all, she would grow up and, of course, find out that they wanted to get rid of her, tried to destroy her while she was still in the womb. The wedding of Camellia and the rich widower was to take place in a week. What would happen to her girl? The bride didn't know, but the decision had already been made. It was just that Camellia had not been privy to the plans of the elders, lest she do something unforeseen. With a baby girl in her arms, Camellia was calm, predictable. How would a mother behave if her child was taken from her? The community didn't want to take any risks. So one night, when Camellia was asleep, you were simply snatched away from your mother. Timmy shook his head. She woke up and the baby was gone. Imagine your mother's horror. Camellia and I thought you were dead at first, but then my sister saw the baby in her sleep and realized her daughter was her. The villagers had just left the girl in the field, dumped the baby on the road at night, left her to die. No one could have imagined that Vita would be found, taken into the family, raised. In general, Camellia, of course, almost went mad with grief. They decided to postpone the wedding again for a couple of weeks so that the bride got used to the loss and came to her senses. Camellia and I didn't wait for the ceremony. We left the same day. There was no life for us in the community anyway. So we decided to try our luck outside the society we were born and raised in, and it all worked out. My brother and sister settled in a small town not far from where we escaped. They weren't really looked for. And so community members searched the town and its neighborhood for a couple of days and went on their way. It wasn't much of a loss. So that's where Timmy's literacy came in handy. He first worked as an apprentice in a workshop and learned to work with machines in the community. There was a lot of old machinery there. Years later, the man saved up money, gained experience, got the right connections, and opened his own business. At first, it was a small workshop. Then the business grew to a whole network. Timmy now owned several services. His sister, Camellia, worked at the hospital as a nurse. It was just the right place for her, a good fit. She could feel people's pain, even counseled doctors sometimes. Camellia never got an education. It was too late. But she found her place in life anyway. But Timmy did. He needed it for his business. "We've been looking for you," Timmy smiled. "We even hired detectives. And you're gonna laugh. We probably went to fortune tellers. Camellia knew you were alive, that you were all right. You saw each other in dreams, but out there in the dream world, you can't tell where a person is in reality. We couldn't figure out where you were. The search never stopped. My sister and I knew we would meet you sooner or later. And then today, quite by accident, you found me, jumping out onto the road. Just like Camellia in her youth, just like you. My heart jumped at once. I knew in an instant. Timmy arrived today for the wedding of his business partner's son. The young man had been in love with his fiancée since high school, but they started dating after graduation. The guy was just at the pinnacle of bliss. Mia's a bride. I mean, she's such a good girl, Timmy smiled. What a blessing it is that Mia is still alive, and it's all thanks to you. That bouquet, Kira stretched out thoughtfully. Only now did she notice that she was still clutching it in her hand. It turns out he not only changed the bride's fate, but mine as well. It's so strange. How could it be that this time this unknown force wanted to help me? It turns out so. Timmy smiled fondly as he looked at his niece. A bouquet and changed the fates of two beautiful girls at once. Unbelievable. Shall we go to Mom's? Kira pronounced. She really wanted to see Camellia, the woman who had supported her all her life, and to finally hear her voice. Timmy nodded with a smile and started the engine. As a child, Linda was considered strange in the yard because she wasn't afraid of dentists either. When other children were being dragged into the dentist's office by their parents with tantrums and faces red from crying. Linda was eager to peek through the narrow slit of the door and see what was going on in there. She wasn't afraid during dental treatment. Maybe because she didn't eat a lot of sweets, or maybe because everything that was going on aroused the girl's keen interest. She followed every movement of the doctors and afterwards asked a million questions, flapping her naive childish eyes. The sound of boron machines, the wonders of filling solidification, white coats. All this was an outlandish world for 8-year-old Linda. It was no surprise to anyone that after graduating from high school, the girl firmly decided to become a dentist. All through high school, she prepared. Diligently, she learned chemical formulas and diligently solved biology tests. Sometimes Linda put on a white coat at home, a cap, and imagined that she was seeing patients. She had once borrowed a doctor's outfit from a neighbor who worked as a pediatrician at the local polyclinic. And want you, Linda, in the teeth of other people's uncles and aunts to pick, sighed her mother, stirring the borscht in the pot. But you want to teach cranky children. Flipping through a book, replied the daughter. I guess you're like your grandmother, the woman grinned, only she was treating cattle on the ranch, and you decided to get to people. Linda grinned understandingly. Grandma Emma had worked as a zoo technician in the small town for a long time, until she retired. And even after that, she often came to check the condition of the animals at the request of her superiors and delivered cows in difficult labor. At the same time, grandmother was not shy to cover young graduates of the Veterinary Institute who had just arrived at the ranch and did not even know that it was dangerous to approach cows and horses from behind. When the ranch was disbanded, the tough-on-words elderly woman continued to be called by the local owners. So as long as the small town had at least a couple of cows, there was plenty of work. Emma lived like that, where she had worked half her life in a small town in Kansas. Linda's mum, Aunt Melissa, took a different path. She didn't want to live in a small town and went to a bigger city, hoping to fit in and achieve a rank above honorary milkmaid. However, the bigger town did not treat Melissa as favorably as she would have liked. The woman did not advance further than a primary school teacher, but received in the last years of good work, a small one-room flat. The kind where the kitchen is already cramped for 2 people. It's where Linda was born and raised. No matter how cozy it was under her mother's wing. But at the age of 15, the girl thought about living separately. But no way. The modest salary of a teacher did not allow such a luxury. Her father stayed with them for a short time. Like many truckers, he lived for 2 families, of which neither of them knew. In the end, the man simply did not return from another trip. The mother waited 6 months, and then, gathering her courage, filed for a unilateral divorce. Linda was secretly sad. She loved her father, and she missed his care, advice, and experience. However, after such a prank, her mother did not start any new relationships. She lived with her work and her daughter. The final exams came, followed by the holidays. And now Linda stood in front of the doors of the medical school, struggling with shyness to enter. She had passed by countless times, dreaming of how she would get her student card and credit. But now the familiar outer wall seemed harsh and pressurizing, even though the fulfillment of her dream depended on them. It felt strange. You're not a sophomore. Someone touched her elbow. Linda turned around and saw a blonde girl with a pointy nose and strange, age-inappropriate, brightly colored hairpins. She looked like a sophomore. Linda opened her student ID. Yeah, I'm in 2. Cool. The stranger shone and clapped Linda on the shoulder. Finally, I found someone. My name is Catherine, by the way. Linda. Linda. Let's go find our group and office. Without waiting for an answer, Catherine pulled her by the arm towards the entrance. The classmate was probably the kick Linda needed to take the next step towards her goal. None of her high school acquaintances had applied to medical school, and she felt inarticulate. There was a sea of new faces around. Many had traveled from other states to study. Only a couple of times did vaguely familiar necks from high school flicker through the crowd. "I came from the state of Michigan that's 1,600 kilometers away," whispered Catherine on the pair. "Where are you from?" "I'm a local. I grew up here in the city," Linda replied. She didn't really want to be reprimanded in her first class, but her roommate apparently liked to talk. On the other hand, she needed to make new friends in the student body. "Cool. I'd always wanted to live in the city, but my folks at the ranch wouldn't let me until I graduated." Catherine rolled her eyes. Linda stared blankly at her new acquaintance sunshine skirt, blouse, shoes that had been the trend in town last year, bright shadows and bold lashes. Apparently fashion was delayed in reaching other states. "I want to be a beautician in general, because in our small town, no one knows how to take care of themselves. It's poultices, 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 poultices. It's horrible." Catherine snorted so loudly that she caught the teacher's questioning look. When the danger passed, she expressively poked a finger with acid green varnish on her eyelids and whispered, "And I'll be a makeup artist. I've already seen some success. I've made up all my girlfriends for the wedding." "Yes, I'm sure you did." Linda held back a smile, looking at the bright spots on the face of her interlocutor. The pressure, simplicity, and a certain naivety with which Catherine communicated both repelled and attracted at the same time. In her, there was no frosts of the big city as in her girlfriends. There was wooden, like a birch log, openness, inherent in all people from the backwoods. "What are you going to do? Give injections or run around as a nurse?" Catherine blew her fringes out of her eyes and stared questioningly at Linda. "I plan to specialize as a dentist. It's been a dream of mine since childhood," she replied. "Oh, well, you'll change your mind 10 times. Waved her hand. "What if you don't like it?" "It's difficult. Dentists them now as lawyers, pond. I hope it doesn't happen." Linda tried to write down the outline, while the restless Catherine poured her with questions. "Will you do the session by yourself or with assistants?" Catherine nodded conspiratorially at the teacher. "I'd like to do it myself. I'll teach. I'll try for sure." Linda had already realized that the chatty Catherine wouldn't leave her alone until she had no more questions to ask. Before the end of the class, the girl from the countryside had time to talk about how she had settled in the dormitory, about how her mother had packed her bales with things, about her nagging neighbors nagging that her shoes were uncomfortable, about the cute students from the parallel group. Discussed the hair color and outfits of all the girls sitting nearby. Even the color of the lecturer's shoes did not escape her keen nose. Linda's head was spinning, but the funny thing was that she wanted to keep talking to this strange lady. There was something about her that Linda was missing. When the class was over, Catherine suggested going to a cafe nearby, saying that she wanted to understand the difference between the cakes made in the city and those made in the countryside. Gradually, Linda and Catherine became such friends that even their teachers began to call them an inseparable couple. Calm, restrained Linda and the volcanic Catherine. Studying wasn't easy. Linda was warned about it, and teachers at school, and her mother. Medicine does not tolerate dilettantes, and students from the first year were driven mercilessly. Sometimes Linda fell asleep over the notes. Her head was swollen from the incredible amount of information crammed in. Early rising and the long road to the institute also exhausted her. But the main thing was that the childhood dream, even if slowly, but approached her. Catherine did not strain herself so much. She often read magazines on the pairs, could oversleep, and in general perceived going to the institute only as an excuse to dress up. "They'll expel you after the first session." Sometimes said Linda, careless friend. "Oh, I just need this crust for a beautician." Catherine waved away. "But for a certificate you need to pass the exam, at least a C," braked her Linda. "I have enough knowledge for a C," confidently declared the fashionista from the backwoods. In fact, Catherine was not so lazy. She just had a different picture of the world. Instead of daily cramming, She preferred to stay up the night before the seminar to answer before forgetting what she had read. She took notes from her neighbors and used textbooks and methods to prop up the wobbly table in her room. Catherine was not lazy, and because she immediately began to look for some part-time jobs. More precisely, they found it themselves, that flyers to hand out in the dormitory. That's something somewhere to carry for a small fee. So by the end of the semester, she was invited to work evening shifts as a barista in a small coffee shop. Catherine brewed coffee a little better than the cleaner, but made eyes at all visitors and smiled at 32 teeth. She left good tips, which the girl used to buy cosmetics and new handbags. Directness and simplicity from the backwoods of Michigan broke through where the urban was difficult. Catherine was not afraid to look silly, and it always played to her advantage. She had a goal, too, and the girl was just going about it in her own way. Linda and Catherine were always fun. She knew the latest gossip, kept a lot of funny stories, could quickly make up her friend in the bathroom before class. On one of the frosty days before the session, Linda stood at the bus stop in the morning and waited for the bus. Several other people were crowding along with her. Time was running out, and the bus was still missing. The grannies behind Linda were getting louder and louder. In the end, a man in an old-fashioned fur hat and a briefcase couldn't stand it any longer and asked the driver of the next bus where the number 14 had gone. "They've all been abolished." He shrugged his shoulders indifferently. "Now you go to the center only with transfers." Rumors that the bus would be abolished had been circulating for a long time. But as it happens, everything happened at the most inopportune moment. The man in the fur hat cursed loudly, not embarrassing the passengers, and began to hurriedly call a taxi. Linda realized that she would have to do the same to avoid being late. As luck would have it, the first class was a seminar with a very picky professor who wouldn't let latecomers in. To get to the institute, Linda gave away all her money, even scraped change out of the furthest pockets. She ran into the auditorium a moment before the bell rang and, breathing loudly, flopped down on the bench next to Catherine. "Where have you been?" "I was already thinking about how to get you off." She pounced on her friend with questions. "My bus doesn't run anymore," Linda complained, laying out her notebook. "I have no idea how to get here now. It's either a detour across the city or a taxi." "So you moved to my dorm," Catherine shouted at once. 5 minutes and you're at school. The main thing is not to forget to brush your teeth." Linda wanted to object, but suddenly realized that the idea wasn't so bad. And if she had to choose between getting up an hour earlier and expensive taxes, Catherine and the dormitory won either way. After all, she'd wanted to live on her own for a long time. Student room fees were ridiculous. She spent more on commuting from home, and she could go to her mum's for the weekends. "I just had a neighbor who moved out, so that, as they say, all the cards were stacked." Catherine theatrically raised her hands to the ceiling. "You'll write an application to the commandant, and they'll move you in quickly." Linda nodded. The time that was spent on the road could be used for more useful purposes, studying, walking, and getting enough sleep. The superintendent was a little nagging when she gave her the papers. "What are you doing?" "You're a local. I need to settle non-residents." The girl kept silent, knowing that she was obliged to settle in. The commandant once again looked at her with the look of a dog wanting to put a dog on a passerby in case of something, but there was no such thing. Eventually she accepted the application and told her the move-in date. As soon as they were out of the dormitory, Catherine squeezed Linda so tightly in her arms that she even squeaked. "Yay, yay, we're together now." Her mother took the news of her daughter's future move with enthusiasm. The flat was cozy, but cramped. And that fact, alas, even a mother's love didn't change. "Don't eat anything bad there," Melissa admonished her daughter, putting towels and a new set of bed linen in her bag. "And don't drink, at my place." She shook her fist expressively, but rather jokingly. "Or that Catherine, your girl, will start to influence you badly," continued the woman. "She's fine." Linda defended her friend. "She's just peculiar." A few days later, on a day off, the girl arrived at the dormitory with her things. Catherine was already waiting for her, helped her to bring everything in, to settle in, showed her where everything was. The room was small, but here Linda had her own separate bed, her own desk, a wardrobe shelf, and a whole wall. All in all, it wasn't too bad. The main thing was that it was a couple of minutes from the uni, and the rest would get used to it. In the evening of the same day, Linda and Catherine were walking down the corridor and suddenly they were called. "Hello, girls." A student peeked out of a nearby room. "Hi, Johnson." Catherine turned and tilted her head to the side, like a magpie looking at a shiny bauble. "What do you want?" "Let's join us, because we, the female company, is not enough." The guy waved his hand invitingly. "We'll feed you, we'll drink you, we won't leave you offended. It's our birthday, after all." Linda tugged Catherine's elbow questioningly. "That's Henry Johnson from third year. He's been after me since the beginning of term," she whispered back. "He's not bad, but he's a bit of an oaf." "And you want to go?" Linda took another look at the boy who was persistently beckoning them to come. "Why not?" Catherine stared at her, puzzled. "Tomorrow is Sunday anyway. There's no need to go anywhere. We'll sit, chat, all of us. Nothing to be afraid of." She turned to Johnson. "All right, we'll be there soon, just wait." The guy glowered, gave them a thumbs up and disappeared into the room. Linda hesitated for a moment, but then she thought about it. She hadn't really made friends with anyone except Catherine in 6 months of school. Of course, she'd talked to her classmates, but it wasn't the same. And her old school friends came to visit less and less often and wrote shorter and shorter letters. And they didn't understand why they had to go to an institute on the other side of town. Catherine quickly combed her hair, changed from pajama trousers into jeans, found a decent t-shirt in the wardrobe. Linda didn't bother with that. She just tied her hair up. There were 3 guys and a girl in the room, apparently the couple of the birthday boy, tall, thin as a pole, but very hospitable. An old acquaintance beckoned and greeted the girls and introduced the company. "This is David, the birthday boy, and his lady Mary. This is Alex, the future of urban medicine. And this," Henry jabbed his finger at a boy sitting on a chair by the window, "is Ray from the journalism department." The girls were warmly welcomed and seated at the communal table. After a while, the shyness of acquaintance evaporated without a trace. Everyone was drinking, eating, joking. Mary suggested a game of crocodile. The boys readily moved the bed and, making room, Linda stared blankly at all the new acquaintances. Henry was making small talk with Catherine. It was obvious he liked her. He was trying to put his arm around her, brushing invisible dust from her shoulder, scratching the back of her head. David and Mary had been together for a long time. It was obvious from their communication and warmth towards each other. A note of distant envy even ran through Linda's mind. She had dated a guy in high school, but he had never treated her with the care and warmth that these two did for each other. Alex made occasional jokes about doctors. During breaks when his mouth wasn't full of food, he'd already put a couple of ketchup stains on his t-shirt. But would that stop a man with a big appetite? Ray was the only one Henry introduced differently than the others, and he didn't fit at the table. He sat by the window with a plate in his hands. But that didn't stop the young man from collecting all the stares. He told stories, he joked, he asked provocative questions, he posed picturesquely. "Ray's a talker," David snorted. "He's a man who's chosen his profession to scratch his tongue." "I'd rather scratch my tongue than pick at people." The journalism student made a theatrical grin, which immediately caused the company to laugh. "What's wrong with helping people?" Linda suddenly asked. Everyone fell silent and stared at her with interest. Ray also looked at the guest. "Well, you're not going to help them for free. Or are you going to open a branch of the Mother Teresa Society?" He sarcastically teased Linda. "I want to help first of all. I go into the profession by the call of my heart, not because it is profitable," said the girl. "You need to eat, don't you? So stop covering your ambition with charity." Ray waved his hand at her. "Sooner or later, people will become just a means of earning money for you. But some people will make money by talking, and some will see rotten teeth and other unpleasant things in the human body." "Ray, come on, this is the 3rd year you've been arguing with us. All professions are needed and all have their talents." David said conciliatingly, "Let's have a drink and play cards." Linda gave Ray an irritated look, but didn't argue further, so as not to offend the birthday boy. The trouble was, she liked the smug talker. Ray had the typical smarmy looks, chiseled features, dark hair, strong charisma, and a sharp mind. Gradually, the angular conversation blurred and the tension it had created went away. The party had passed midnight when there was a knock on the door. "Sugar," David hissed, "the commandant's here." Before Linda knew it, the table was covered with a sheet. Mary and Alex were tucked under one bed, Catherine and Henry under another, and she and Ray were shoved into the wardrobe. It all happened so fast that hardly a fly could have flown in that time. The commandant's voice was heard, reprimanding David in a half-toned voice for the noise and mess after lights out, while he did his best to demonstrate the supposedly empty room. And so it was, every time. Ray sighed in Linda's ear, "Why don't you just pay your aunt a wage? He'll hide us in the cupboards, you idiot." The wardrobe was cramped. Linda felt her back against the guy's chest and almost stepped on his feet. For some reason her cheeks were flaming and her tongue was lashing out. Ray gently touched her shoulder, as much as he could do while standing in a wardrobe full of clothes. "You'll have to excuse me, okay? It's my nature to pick things apart." That was rude. Without turning round, Linda replied. She could feel the guy's guilty, if guilty, breath on the back of her neck. It was getting stuffy. "Let's go out tomorrow, and as an apology, you pick where you want to go." Ray put his hand on her forearm. The commandant let go of the last of her nagging remarks, wagged her finger at David, and made to leave. Goosebumps ran up and down his body, hot and cold at the same time. The tension was back in the air, but lingering, enveloping. "Let's go," Linda agreed, "to the exhibition of contemporary artists at the gallery." "All right, I'll be waiting at 17 at the dormitory." The wardrobe doors swung open. "Why aren't you two fighting?" David chuckled. "Almost." Ray was the first to jump out, winking discreetly at Linda. "You all right? Why did they put you and that jerk in there?" Catherine clucked, giving the boy a stare. "I think we're going on a date with that jerk," Linda whispered quietly, trying to hide her red cheeks and the stupid love sparkle in her eyes. "Linda, you have golden hands." The grateful patient smiled goodbye and left the office. Linda took off her gloves and nodded to herself in the mirror. It was for moments like this that she had gone to the dentist's office, for grateful looks and sincere appreciation. And she didn't regret the years she'd spent studying. First 5 in medical school, then residency for another 3. Paperwork for the registrar's office. A dressing gown to take home to wash. So what else Catherine to call? They were supposed to meet today for a professional holiday. Linda threw on her coat, said goodbye to the girls at the reception desk and hurried to the shop for a cake. Catherine had still had a sweet tooth since uni. No one was home to see her yet. Ray warned that he would be at the agency until the evening. He'd started moonlighting there while he was still at school, and 7 years later he'd taken the editor's chair himself. But Ray had connections with every authority in the city, from vegetable stalls to the prosecutor's office. They were married in college, a year after the relationship and that dorm room meeting. Catherine had convinced her that Ray was good, of course, but he was dapper and pays her. Her mother didn't take the journalism profession seriously. What kind of work is it to gather gossip? Like plowing in a factory or sowing grain, that's a job. She snorted when Linda came to visit at weekends and raved about her boyfriend. Ray was not what he seemed at first glance, nor was he what everyone else saw him as. He could be caring and sensitive, and even restrained his desire to pick at everything. At the same time, remained the soul of the company, a noisy lighter. Many girls openly envied Linda and openly glared at Ray when they appeared at the institute. "There's nothing to see here," Catherine waved her hands at them. "You're not here for the ballet." Shoo. Although she had initially opposed Linda and Ray's relationship, she soon became an ardent defender of their peace of mind and was even a bridesmaid at the wedding. Not without pride, she told the guests that without her the young people would not have met. It might have seemed that Catherine simply had nothing to do. But how wrong were those who thought so? The backwoods fashionista had affairs with 2 or 3 at a time. Never a dull moment in the evening. Sometimes she chose from several candidates and was not ashamed to use her natural beauty. Those problems that she herself did not want to solve suitors. So Catherine finished her studies, not really knowing what she was studying for. She got her medical degree as a working makeup artist. She did not go to any residency, and settled in a beauty studio, having mastered in addition to makeup, hair, and other beauty procedures. From boredom, or from flightiness, married, and 6 months later divorced. Another year fluttered on dates and married again. Catherine wasn't lazy, she was just lucky. She was also never shy about doing things that others disapproved of. That's why she won where others failed. Linda sometimes thought that her road was straight and quiet, where you could see all the stops and bumps for miles ahead. Catherine's road, on the other hand, wiggled like a snake and pitted or went under the clouds. The important thing was that eventually they both ended up with a destination. The tea was getting cold. Linda was already thinking of calling her friend, who was almost an hour late, when she heard a fuss in the entrance and a call. "Can you believe it, you bastard?" The client was late. She held me up. Then the taxi was still running. Catherine started to get indignant. Linda only smiled. They hugged. It couldn't have been any other way. In the past few years, Catherine had changed from a strange backwoods girl with ambitions into a genteel city beauty. She had a bob haircut, was always wearing makeup and fashionably dressed, and she was more concerned with a new skirt and going for a massage than having groceries at home. "Oh, you cooked for Ray." Catherine, barely passing into the kitchen, immediately stuck her nose in the pots on the cooker and in the fridge, and she has borscht and stuffed cabbage and compote. Linda did not chase after brands and hairstyles. She dressed minimalistically and simply, but she knew how to keep things cozy and on time. "Harry's nagging at me because I don't cook," Catherine complained. "Everyone has their talents," Linda reassured her as she poured tea. The friendly chat went on late into the night. It was always like this when they met. The cake was almost over and Linda was making coffee for the third time when Ray finally came home. The young editor was disheveled and twitchy. He came into the kitchen to say a quick hello, hugged his wife and retired to his room, saying he'd had a hard day. "Why is he so sour?" Catherine asked, after a glance at the man. "He must be tired." Linda shrugged her shoulders. "I can't force him to sit down at the table." Come on. Catherine jumped up from her chair and reached for her friend's shoulder. "What is this?" She picked up a red hair with 2 long fingernails and showed it to the stunned Linda. She stopped in surprise. Maybe it was an accident? "Yeah. Say it was blown in by the wind. I'm a friend of men. I know them like the back of my hand. He came in tired, with someone else's hair on, and he's working hard, poor man." "What are you implying?" Linda looked round the room. "I'm not implying anything yet, but I have the fact on my fingers." Catherine shrugged her shoulders. "We need to watch him. Think back. Maybe you had something strange going on." Linda thought about it. Her friend's suspicions had shifted the bricks of her inner fortress just a little, but it was enough to make the building shake. Ray had replaced in Linda the father she had been deprived of. He became both friend and husband at once. The first years they lived soul to soul, understood each other without words, and as if a whole universe was formed in the merger of 2 dissimilar characters. Then they experienced several crises in their relationship. There were quarrels, as with everyone, but they quickly became the past. For the last year they lived a very measured relationship, but loaded professionally. Both worked hard to achieve their goals. Maybe they started to socialize less. "Is everything okay in bed?" Catherine questioned her. "Well, maybe because of the work became a little less." "Yes," agreed Linda. "Yes, what are you bothering at all? There is one hair, and already panic." "Her hair is where it all starts." Catherine raised her finger authoritatively. "I advise you to go through his pockets, sniff his shirts and his laptop too." "I'm not going to sniff his shirts. What's the big deal?" Linda was indignant, although subconsciously doubts were already clinging to her. "And also go to his workplace. Maybe they have a red-headed student trainee there," she said in a conspiratorial whisper. Catherine said in a conspiratorial whisper. They chatted for a while and Catherine went home. "Yes, Lindochka, I almost forgot. My salon will celebrate the anniversary of the opening. Come with Ray. You're my regular at the Willow and Bath Cafe next week, Friday." "We'll come." Of course, Linda nodded. "Smell the shirts." Catherine winked at her, sent her a kiss and disappeared into the lift. Involuntarily, but Linda began to look at her husband. Until Catherine's words, she had never thought to accuse him of cheating. Of course, this fact was vaguely believable, but still. One evening, Linda went through her husband's things. God, what am I doing? She asked herself when she actually sniffed the collar of Ray's favorite shirt. It didn't smell suspicious, and there was no hair either. Linda calmed down and put Catherine's words out of her mind. Catherine is Catherine, and her Ray is not like that. She had long ago accepted his job and the need to socialize with loads of people in a day. Whoever her husband might have had a meeting with. It's all nonsense. Ray, we're all right, aren't we? Linda asked on the way to the cafe. She didn't know why she asked. The inner restlessness hadn't completely gone away. Ray turned to her. Yes, why are you suddenly asking? Why am I asking? Linda wondered. You can't tell me Catherine found the hair. You've been away at work lately. We don't talk much, she said. Lindochka, you know that I have a lot of things to do and responsibilities every day. Soon I'll get an assistant and relax a little. Ray smiled at her. Oh, here we are. Catherine was already waiting for them at the entrance. Apparently drunk and in full battle color, she was friends with the owner of the salon and had even bought a small share of the business from her, so she could invite anyone to the party. Linda sometimes wondered where the careless Catherine got the money for such a thing, but the mystery remained a mystery. The mini corporate party was a lot of fun. The women's company was diluted by a few men: the owner's husband, the masseur's boyfriend, and Linda's and Catherine's husbands. Linda didn't know her friend's new husband. She had only seen him at the wedding and couldn't remember where he had come from. Harry looked frankly bored, constantly attached to glasses of champagne, sighed, and very sluggishly participated in the general celebration. The hostess raffled off certificates for free treatments among the guests. Linda successfully won one of them and hurried to please her husband, who went outside for a smoke. She jumped out of the door and looked around puzzled. The only person outside was Catherine, who was on the phone. Have you seen Ray? Her friend asked her. Catherine put the machine away in her purse. Linda, while you participated in the raffle, your husband doused his trousers with wine and went to change, she shouted. And we, came delivery of new manicure tables. Idiots, they mixed up the days. I'm going to go to the salon to get them so Miranda doesn't freak out. Ciao, Linda. I'll be right back. Have fun. Catherine jumped into a taxi and sped away. Puzzled, Linda dialed Ray, who confirmed that he had doused his trousers, would change and be back soon. Miss me? She heard a voice from behind her. Harry emerged from the doorway. Linda answered it automatically. No. They said hello very crumply for the first few minutes. The girl wondered why her husband had not warned her and left so hastily. Let's talk, shall we? I don't know anyone here but you, and there's nothing to talk about with these chickens from the salon. They're all talking about manicures and new hair colors. He yawned tiredly and flicked his lighter. Come on, Linda agreed, realizing she was in a similar situation. Harry asked about his work, his habits, his studies, but only when he was talking about himself. He complained about Catherine, either explicitly or implicitly. Linda realized he was drunk, but for some reason she listened. She'd never talked to someone in such a way about her friend, as if she'd been given a glimpse into a secret suitcase. She cooks once a week, and then some rubbish that's impossible to eat, and I'm used to home-cooked food. My mom was a cook all her life, Harry sighed. You work here from morning till night. You want borscht, tea, cutlets, pies, and she'll buy salads or dumplings, dear. Ugh. But she puts on makeup for 3 hours. Why did you get married then? Cautiously switching to you, asked Linda. She's beautiful. She's so beautiful. You can't take your eyes off her. When I saw her, everything, the veil covered my brain. But now you realize that you can't eat beauty alone. Harry finished smoking, moved closer and whispered. And I gave her money for a share in that damn salon for some reason. I thought she'd stop hanging around there herself. She'd be home to manage and earn an income. No way. Linda suddenly felt sorry for Harry. She realized that his rose-colored glasses had shattered inside. On the one hand, he'd seen who he'd married. And on the other hand, beauty had always fooled men. I'd like a wife like you, Linda, a calm, responsible, homely woman who's ready to raise children. Not plaster chickens in front of the mirror, Harry said, looking into her eyes. Linda was taken aback and pulled her fingers out of Harry's hands, which he had already managed to grab. I don't think that's a good idea, the girl cut him off. We should have gone back inside a long time ago. She turned and walked quickly into the cafe. Her heart was pounding frantically, her head was full of bewilderment and shame, her ears were ticking. Linda sat down in her seat at the table and poured half a glass of wine. Shall I tell Catherine what happened, the complaints, Harry and the fat hints? She'll start questioning him. They'll have a fight, have to stir it all up again. No, let them deal with their own problems and each other. Linda took a swig of her drink and reached for a sandwich. For some reason, she felt sick to her stomach and she wanted to hug Ray, but he had disappeared. She phoned. Her husband said he was almost there, but he was stuck in traffic, and finally he walked into the cafe in jeans and a t-shirt. About 10 minutes later, a panting Catherine burst in, desperately arguing on the phone with someone. What kind of idiots are these? This is not a company, this is a quiet horror. Not only did they come on the wrong day, but they almost hurt me. She pointed to a barely visible bruise on her elbow and an abrasion on her forearm. I'm sorry it took so long. Linda. Ray hugged her from behind. The traffic would drive you crazy. Why didn't you warn me? Linda asked the girl. I was standing in the middle of the hall with, pardon me, wet trousers. I don't have time to talk. I hurried to the car and rushed to change my trousers. Ray waved his arms guiltily to the sides. Nearby, Catherine continued to make noise and indignation. Linda calmed down a little when she felt her husband's hand on her arm. On the other side of the table sat a silent Harry, glaring at her through the wall of a clear glass. A few days passed. Linda was finishing up her work at the clinic. She was in a good mood. Her last 8-year-old patient had been a delight to her with his bravery and resilience. He even hugged the doctor's aunt goodbye. And under his mum's proud, embarrassed gaze, he said, "Thank you." Of course, Linda could not just let the little hero leave the office and handed him a brand new toothbrush, which was left by the brand representative for promotional purposes. The young doctor had already said goodbye to all her colleagues and was standing at the door when the phone in her pocket rang. Linda, help me out. Catherine's voice came through the phone. Come as a model. My student and I need to practice, and the model is sick, the bastard. Now? Linda was surprised. Yes, it's urgent. Catherine begged. Okay, I'll be right there. The girl hung up the phone. Linda often helped her friend. It was not difficult and pleasant. After all, she always came home with beautiful makeup and styling, and Catherine's training was not disrupted. It took Linda about half an hour to get to the salon. She was already waiting, sat in a chair, and under the popular tracks of the radio airwaves, Catherine and her student began to work. The girlfriend was scattered in another round of thanks and scolded the irresponsible model student who didn't show up. When the work was done and the student went home, Catherine suggested that Linda stay and have a cup of coffee. It turned out very well. Catherine looked at the makeup and said, "She's a smart girl. Maybe something good will come out of her." Linda clapped her eyelashes theatrically, turning one side and then the other. At the same time, she caught a glimpse of the old manicure tables. Linda wouldn't have confused them. She'd been to Catherine's workplace so many times she'd already memorized how the tables stood and on which one, how the light from the window fell. I thought you said you were going to replace the tables. She stared questioningly at her makeup artist friend. Where are they? They turned out to be defective. We sent them back. Catherine waved her hand. What, all at once? Linda wondered. They all had scratched tops. I told you, idiots. Those movers were pounding them against each other like crazy. Catherine brushed the shadow off her friend's cheek with a brush. Only spoilt our holiday in nerves. Did they hit you with the tables too? Linda nodded at the greenish bruise on the makeup artist's elbow. Yeah, Catherine didn't even look at her arm. They opened the door as if it were their home. and I got bumped for company. The friends were finishing their coffee and had long ago switched to another topic, when Catherine, who was scrolling through the news feed on her phone, suddenly jumped in. Linda looked. She shoved a machine with a picture open on the screen to Linda's nose. The girl looked at the picture and hesitated. The photo was of the entire staff of the agency where Ray worked. The guys were with some certificates in their hands, apparently another award from the big shots. But another interesting thing was that a young red-haired girl was standing next to Ray. "Aha," Catherine shouted triumphantly. "I told you so, I told you so." "I told you so," Linda said, looking at the photograph. I felt sick to my stomach. The nasty feeling from her conversation with Harry and the homespun excitement of finding the red hair again. "It's okay, Linda, we'll expose him." Catherine clenched her manicured fingers into a fist. "If anything, you'll be the first to file for divorce." "What divorce, Catherine?" Linda jumped up like a flaming rock. "It's not even clear yet." "It's as clear as day, dear." Your friend folded her arms authoritatively across her chest. "Your ray's gone off and we've got to go over there and pull that redhead's hair out." "Right." Linda clenched her hands on her temples. "I don't believe in this nonsense." "Okay," Catherine agreed. "Watch him very carefully this week. Men always get caught up in the little things." "I will." Linda nodded. She was tempted to give Catherine a hint about Harry's behavior, but she didn't. Resentment could make a mess of things, especially since Catherine was just drawing her own conclusions. A little obsessively, but for now there was no one to take offense at, and nothing to take offense at. Ray was on his usual behavior. Linda, teased by Catherine's confidence, began to surreptitiously watch her husband, something she usually never did. Linda, until that day, had thought that there was no point in restricting the freedom of a partner, forbidding something, scandals or jealousy scenes. She had realized this when she was still a student, although she loved Ray very much, admired him as a man, as a human being. The more control, the higher the probability of the opposite effect, and to arrange emotional swings with a choleric sanguine like her husband, a noisy and dangerous task. Scenes and emotions to that was enough at work. At home, wanted to be calm. He said so himself. During the day, the young editor is a chameleon to adjust to anyone who got to his office, and in the evening, at home, wanted to be himself. Feeling like a delinquent schoolgirl, Linda rummaged through her husband's rucksack, his notebook, while he was in the shower. She found a list of phone numbers and women's names on the pages of the notebook, and a strange pink-colored pen in his jacket pocket. Her heart pounded, thudding in her ears, as if it had been covered with a bucket. "Linda, what are you doing?" Ray stood in the doorway, looking at his wife in amazement. The girl froze with the evidence she had found in her hands. "Are you accusing me of something?" The man folded his arms across his chest. "What is it?" Linda jabbed her finger at the list of numbers. "These are the candidates for the assistant position." The man shrugged his shoulders indifferently. "I interviewed them last week. I put them all here. Why?" "Did you use this?" Linda waved a pink girl's pen in the air. "First my own. Then I ran out of paste and Kira lent me her writing utensils. What's the problem? Why are you going through my stuff?" Ray looked round at the slight mess on the desk. Nostrils dilating, Linda felt like a fool. She mumbled something under her breath, slipped the notebook and pen to her husband, and went into the kitchen. His explanations were very convincing, but the worm of paranoia continued to gnaw its way into her thoughts. Linda squeezed her temples with her hands and sat down at the table in the kitchen. She grabbed her phone and texted Catherine about what had happened. The makeup artist didn't believe her friend's husband's excuses and suggested that she follow up with him to be sure. Linda looked at her schedule, figured something out, and texted back. "Come on." Linda went to bed late. Ray was already having his 10th dream when she finally settled down. Before that, she stared at her sleeping husband's face for a long time, trying to find answers to the questions that tormented her. In the morning, she pulled herself together, pretended that nothing had happened, walked Ray to work, and waited for Catherine. Her friend arrived just as Ray drove out of the yard. "You ready?" Catherine's voice had a poorly concealed excitement, as if she'd been waiting a long time for permission. Do I have a choice? Larissa looked at her as she buckled her seatbelt in the car. Well, you might not like what you see if you see anything. Catherine corrected herself, shrugging her shoulders. But I'd rather not see anything, of course. He's a little distant, Linda murmured as they caught up with Ray on the road and pulled a few cars ahead of them. He seemed fine, but something was wrong. That's how it starts, Catherine nodded, looking down the road. First they get cold feet and then they start lying. Our feminine instincts can't be fooled. Did your previous husband cheat on you? Linda suddenly blurted out for some reason. Katya jerked slightly at the wheel, so surprised by the question. Bill might have cheated, she said uncertainly, but I didn't care anymore. I went out on a date, and I realized I was sick of Bill. Yeah, I felt sorry for him. I didn't tell him, and when he got bored, I filed for divorce. Aren't you afraid that Harry might cheat on you? Linda barely restrained her impulse to spill the truth. Harry? Please. Catherine waved her hand, instantly relaxing. He's in love with me like a dog, always waiting for me. He's not that in love. Linda muttered under her breath so Catherine wouldn't hear. They pulled into the car park outside Ray's work. His car was already there. It was going to be a long ambush. Catherine promptly ran to the nearest stall for coffee and scones. It took until lunchtime to doze in the car. Catherine nudged Linda in the shoulder as Ray came out of the agency with the red-haired girl from the photo. They got in the car and got ready to drive out. Let's go, lovebirds, we'll get them now. Catherine muttered excitedly, twisting the steering wheel. Linda watched her husband's car with bated breath. She recognized the girl in the photo. Ray had said it was his assistant, but was it just that? The answer to that question loomed somewhere on the horizon. The editor and her companion drove down to the city utility into the stationery shop. On the whole, there were no provocative moments, except for the opening of the door. The girl carried a folder of papers, occasionally asking Ray something or answering the phone. He hardly ever took his eyes off the phone, even when he was driving. Yeah, he's holding the door for you. Catherine's eyes widened when she noticed her friend's husband's gesture of kindness. Almost always, Linda replied, following Ray with her eyes. Look, why don't you call him right now, Catherine suggested. Ask him what he's doing and see what the answer is. Linda dialed the number and waited. Ray's phone was busy, but he switched calls almost immediately and picked up. Hi, did you pick up lunch? She blurted out at his hello. No, I'll eat in the canteen. Don't worry, her husband replied in a completely calm voice. All right, Linda stretched out. How was your day? I'm traveling for work. And why are you calling? No reason. Linda sensed that her husband suspected something. I'll see you tonight, bye. Catherine listened to this conversation with her arms folded across her chest. He didn't say he was traveling with a woman. She waggled her eyebrows expressively, hiding. That's right. Her wooden confidence pierced the last shield of doubt in Linda's chest. Why the hell does he even need an assistant? Catherine clasped her hands together. Somehow he's been working on his own for 2 years, and nothing. And now all of a sudden, the ambition of the head of the brain. I don't know. Linda was staring out the window. Tired, I guess. Yeah, from work or your wife. Catherine snorted. Let's go home. Are you drinking white or red? In the evening, Ray found the 2 drunken girlfriends at home. Linda couldn't get Catherine out of the house for about an hour. She was asking for a drink. She was hugging. She was hugging. She was losing something in her bag. Eventually, Harry arrived and took his rambunctious wife himself. He cast a glance at Linda, full of interest and question, and they left. Now her husband seemed to Linda the best and most innocent of men. She fell dreamily asleep, hugging her pillow and whispering something to it with just her lips. Ray sat in the chair and waited for his spouse to fall asleep. He did not scold her, did not lecture her, only set the alarm clock, put a couple of loose pills on the table, and put a glass of water. Then he went out, standing on the threshold of the room as if in doubt, but the second confusion lasted only a moment. The man glanced at Linda, nodded to himself, and closed the bedroom door. Linda became nervous and twitchy. She began to be late for work. For the first time, she snapped at a patient who traveled to her from across town. "Linda, maybe you should take a holiday?" sympathetically asked the admin girls at the front desk. "Maybe I will," replied the doctor, wrinkling her forehead tensely. She began to notice a cooling in her and Ray's relationship. He hugged her dryly, he forgot the usual little things, or he dropped her calls and called her back. Linda remembered the way the other female students looked at him during their studies. Ray always stood out. He was stately, charismatic, had a great sense of humor, and a sharp mind. Next to him, she, but felt sometimes that she was falling short. Over the years, Ray had not lost any of his appeal, and even became even brighter. "You've got a payday today. Go to the shopping center, buy yourself something, a dress, shoes, and your mood will improve," advised Linda. It was a good idea. In this turmoil, she had almost forgotten that it was the height of summer, and she didn't have to be cramped with stupid jeans and notorious t-shirts. Linda called Catherine and suggested that they go shopping together after work, but her friend said she was busy and refused. In the shopping center, the windows were full of sale posters. Mannequins towered between the rows of clothes. Linda remembered what trousers and styles of dresses Catherine had advised her the day before and began to walk along the racks. After choosing a few options, she went to the fitting room. What a nice surprise she heard behind her when she came out to assess her outfit in the large mirror in front of the booths. Linda turned around and saw Harry. The man had wandered into the mall, apparently for the same reason she had to update his wardrobe. Well, what a surprise. Linda grumbled, "Hello, Harry. The dress fits perfectly." He gave her a thumbs up, "Don't even think about it." This time he was fresh and had a positive attitude. The old memories that had come alive with his appearance slid unpleasantly down my back. "Linda, I wanted to apologize," Harry began, putting his hands behind his head shyly. "I got drunk in that cafe out of nervousness and fatigue, talking rubbish. I'm sorry, I acted like a complete prick." Linda was surprised, pleasantly surprised. "Okay, it happens. What are you doing here?" She glanced round the shop, as if confirming the question. "I closed a nerve-wracking deal at work, exhaled, and decided to buy something I'd been wanting for a while." Harry nodded at the bag from the hardware shop, and the new jeans are a bonus. Linda looked at the jeans appraisingly. "You take them too, don't think twice." She smiled slightly. Even this sudden company in the form of Harry was somehow to her liking. Maybe it was a distraction from her obsessive thoughts. Maybe she needed a counselor, or maybe it was something else. "Catherine's all worked up, and she won't come with me," he said as they left the shop. "Me too, she's busy today," Linda confirmed. "How about a coffee?" Harry suggested, "or was there something else you wanted to buy?" Larissa thought that the lingerie shopping would have to be postponed and nodded in agreement, approving the idea of coffee at the checkout. At the cafeteria checkout, she dashed over to pay herself, but Harry was the first to arrive and put a flavored drink and a small dessert in front of her, the latter of which Linda hadn't ordered. "Oh, come on. As the husband of my best friend." Harry waved his hand. "We're practically related." He didn't get a chance to say anything before he heard a text message from the bank. "What was that for?" Harry stared sourly at Linda, looking at the balance on the card. "Almost, but not relatives." The girl commented briefly. They chatted, then went back down to the shopping floors and wandered for a long time, choosing one pretty thing or another. Linda sensed that Harry was enjoying himself with her. He didn't turn on that whiner in the cafe anymore, but was cheerful and somehow relaxed at the same time. He talked about all sorts of funny situations at work, reminiscing about old friends and years of schooling. There was even room for a story about his childhood and Harry's fun holidays as a first grader in a small town. Listening to all of this, Linda did the most important thing. She took her mind off the intrusive thoughts of her husband's outings. She had to get home. It was nearing evening and Linda hailed a taxi as they stood at the entrance to the shopping center. "Thanks for the company at the mall," Linda smiled as the car pulled up. Thank you for the pleasant walk. Maybe we can do it again sometime? Harry opened the taxi door for her. It's probably not the right thing to do, Linda hesitated. Harry gave her a quick peck on the cheek and said, "Well, you're a big girl. It's time you prioritized what's right." Linda drove home dazed, outraged, and flattered, a rattling mixture of all the emotions of the last few days. Resentment towards her husband, worry about their private life, irritation, and into all of it sprinkled sparks of innuendo from Harry. It wasn't right. It wasn't nice that she was having coffee with her best friend's husband, who was making ambiguous hints to her for the second time. Why? Well, of course she knew why. She knew that she loved Ray. She knew that she valued Catherine as a friend and loved one, and she knew that she wasn't ready to go for what Harry was veiledly offering her. All plain and simple. But then why is she flattered by his attention? Is it not compensation for a grudge from Ray? How long has it been since he spent almost half of his day off with her? The more Linda thought about it, the more the questions became, leading her into the wilds or to an unpleasant crossroads. Tomorrow I'll talk to Ray straight, Linda decided, and I'll tell Catherine the truth about her husband. That'll be the right way to prioritize. The next day, Linda had few patience, so she got off early after work. On the way, she received a call from a nervous Ray, asking her to bring the work phone she had forgotten at home. On the way, she thought about the best words to say to her friend and her husband. She decided to start with the first one. She dialed Catherine's number and proposed to meet in the evening. The makeup artist happily sang into the phone about her agreement and even asked if she should dress up. "No, we'll just sit around," came the reply. As Linda entered the flat, she heard Ray's work phone ringing. She picked it up from the mirror in the hallway and glanced absently at the screen. There were about 10 missed calls. "Will computers? Information bridge," Linda mumbled, flicking through the screen on her smartphone. She was already getting into a taxi when a text message sent around 1 o'clock in the morning caught her eye. "I missed you, my affectionate boss. Looking forward to tomorrow." Linda felt as if she had been splashed with cold water. There it was. Her suspicions, here in her hands on the screen of her husband's phone. Tears welled up in her eyes, her nose stung, and her throat was filled with rage and jealousy. Linda caught her own gaze in the rearview mirror and was taken aback. She was looking at an angry and deceived woman who wanted revenge and justice. All plans to talk to her husband were forgotten in a moment. "Boss," Linda hissed, clutching the phone so tightly that it almost cracked. The taxi driver involuntarily glanced at the passenger. He could sense with his spinal cord that something was going on behind him. The only thing the girl managed to do before jealousy finally drowned her in its cauldron was to write down the number the text message had been sent from. Linda burst into the agency's office with flaming cheeks. The staff said hello to her, but the girl didn't hear. She yanked Ray's office door open to the astonished stares, but it wouldn't budge. "Ray," at lunch, said a fellow journalism student timidly, emerging from the right. He was the first one to catch Linda's furious gaze. "We'll wait for him here." Linda glanced angrily at the assistant's empty chair next to the office and plumped down in her chair, tapping her fingers on the desktop. The whole office stared at her with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Someone had apparently called Ray on the sly, and he came rushing in a few minutes later. "How's it good, sweetheart?" Linda got up from her chair and angrily shoved the phone screen with the message into his nose. At the same time, she glared angrily at Kira, who was frozen in the doorway behind the boss with a stack of documents. "Linda, what's the gig?" Ray tried to pull his wife into the office. "Come on, let's talk calmly." Linda pulled out of her husband's arms and expressively raised her hand with the phone, showing it to the whole office. "Know why? I want everyone to know what a wonderful person you are." She emphasized the word wonderful, a decent boss and a faithful husband. Ray clutched his head, feeling Spanish shame for his wife. "And you should be," Linda pointed her finger at a stunned Kira, "ashamed of yourself for messing around with a married man." "Linda, stop it." Ray grabbed his wife in an arm and dragged her forcefully into his office. Let me go, you traitor." Linda lashed out, hitting her hand on the door. Annoyed Ray sat his wife in his chair and loomed over her. What did you do? And even if it's such an emergency, why the show? What are you trying to accomplish? Linda looked at him with eyes red with rage and tears. She shoved the work phone and the message on it in her husband's face again. How do you explain this? Sleeping with your young assistant, huh? That's it. The old wife is no longer honored. Linda, have you lost your mind? Ray rubbed the bridge of his nose and exhaled. Somebody obviously got the wrong number in the heat of the moment. I even know Linda crossed her arms over her chest, that red head with the hair you come home with. Jesus, don't you have anything better to do than look for other people's hair on my shirts? Ray rolled his eyes. Find something more productive to do. And Kira has a fiancé, just so you know. And you call your Kira's number, and we'll find out if she's wrong or not. Linda demanded with clenched fists. Everything inside her was boiling with rage and responded with a new wave to every phrase of her husband. Her back was soaked, her cheeks and forehead were burning. Ray picked up his work smartphone and pressed the speakerphone during a call. The answering machine's electronic voice came through the receiver. It rang several times, but to no avail. That doesn't prove anything, Linda said. Linda, go home. Please stop embarrassing me in front of my subordinates, Ray asked in a very firm, quiet voice, turning away to the window. The girl felt that her claims were being ignored, that it was as if everyone was laughing at her in her voice without being embarrassed about it. Why did it say the word supervisor? She threw back at Ray, grabbing the doorknob. I have no idea. As if there weren't enough bosses in town, Ray replied without turning around. Linda stepped out of her husband's office, and a dozen curious eyes stared at her. She walked briskly down the corridor, not looking at anyone, and on the way out of the building she saw Kira standing by the car park. She was being hugged and apparently comforted by some guy. Linda froze for a moment, and then shame came over her in a wave that burned her from the inside out. Tears held back for so long tore down the barrier and dripped from her eyes. It's okay. Linda. Catherine counted drops of valerian. Men, they are so dodgy, cunning, but do not cry because of it. Appreciate your dignity. She handed Linda a glass of water and a sedative. Catherine arrived as soon as she heard her friend's unintelligible voice mixed with crying. Catherine, I've embarrassed him. She took the glass with a shaky hand, and him and me. I'm anticipating a story on their website editor's sleep-deprived ex-wife breaks into office. Oh my God, that's embarrassing. Linda was in tears again. She hadn't been able to calm down for about an hour. Well, Catherine said, at least you're remembered. Why do you have to go there anyway? I'm such an idiot. Linda leaned into her friend's shoulder. We're all a little bit stupid. Catherine gently put her palm on her head. Why did you call me this afternoon? Linda realized that she couldn't handle another confrontation today. I just wanted to chat, she said, maybe go shopping. Well, we're not going out now. No foundation can hide your puffy eyes. I'm telling you as an expert. Catherine raised her finger to the ceiling, which made Linda smile a little. What are you going to do about Ray? I don't believe in random messages. I don't know, maybe I'm just really paranoid. Linda leaned back against the sofa and stared at the ceiling. If so, I should apologize. I'd still dig. Catherine did not stop. It would be reckless of him to sleep with his almost secretary. It's like a joke situation. There's someone else, that's for sure. I'll talk to him, Linda breathed out, if I could. For some reason, she dialed the number she had copied from her husband's phone again. And once again it was answered by the monotonous muttering of an electronic robot. Ray came home late that evening, but Linda still waited for him. Her husband looked at her glumly and, without a word, left for the shower. Ray, I'm sorry. Linda waited for him in the room. The man walked past her, shaking his head. I'll forgive you, Linda, but my reputation is ruined by your tantrum today. There'll be whispers behind my back, and I gave Kira the day off. I was wrong, Ray. Linda stared sorrowfully at the floor. I'm so ashamed. I was so ashamed. Ray sat down on the other side of the couch. You've turned into some kind of paranoid neurotic, haven't you? Going through my things, sniffing my hair, doing this and that, because of some stupid mistake by some stranger, whoever the hell she is. It just seemed to me that our relationship had grown cold, Linda murmured quietly. When it seems, darling, it's customary to cross yourself, Ray muttered. You're playing the jealous wife, aren't you? The idea had failed. But Catherine said, Linda began. Oh, you and Catherine should be in the yellow ward together with ideas like that. Her husband came at her again. She doesn't know what she's listening to. She can't see what's under her nose, but she's giving you the best advice. She herself has a husband who walks left and right. All of a sudden, Ray stopped halfway through the sentence. It looked as if he'd said something unnecessary, and now he was trying to figure out how to put it back. Linda's ears perked up. Anyway, the man squeezed the bridge of his nose with his fingers and closed his eyes. Take a sedative and don't talk to Catherine about any of this nonsense. She's a bad influence. Ray got up and left the room, signaling that the conversation was over. Linda was left sitting alone in the dark, confused and full of doubt. Ray knows something about Harry but keeps quiet, male solidarity or something. And why is he suddenly so against Catherine? The tormented Linda paid no attention to her husband's real coldness and his blatant unwillingness to address the problem and forgive her. A week passed. Life went on as usual. The head doctor of the clinic informed Linda that she and 2 other young dentists were going to a 3-day conference in another city. The girl was even a little happy about this turn of events. It might help her take her mind off her worries, although outwardly no one would have found any reason to do so in Linda's life. Her husband was friendly to her. Catherine still called and chattered like a magpie about everything. The patients hadn't decreased. But behind the outer mask of normality was the affable coldness of her husband, a girlfriend drowned in rhinestones, and a job that suddenly became exhausting and drained all her energy. Linda could never find the strength to talk to her friend about her spouse. She had no proof on her hands except her own words. No, enough with the suspicions. I'd better get my own family in order first. Ray agreed that the trip would be good for his wife and even bought her a train ticket. Go listen to some smart guys and aunts, go for a walk, and get all the nonsense out of your head, he told Linda as she packed her traveling bag. The train was tapping its wheels. The girl rarely traveled by train, and each time it was a bit of a novelty. Colleagues were arguing animatedly nearby to the clinking of the glass of the cup holders. Maybe Ray's right, I am paranoid. He and I have been together since we were 18, and there's never been any occasion, Linda thought, looking out the window at the passing railway stations and Christmas trees. And the amount of stares at him at uni, I didn't care then, well, hardly. Yes, it's all Catherine's way of panicking herself and others. Whether it was the monotonous choo-choo-choo that chased away the bad thoughts or the atmosphere of the journey, Linda was in a pleasant mood. She put her head down on the iron and freshly laundered linen. I'll be back and we'll definitely go to Grandma's in Iowa, Linda decided and closed her eyes. Training in the company of the sea and the sun really did the girl good. In the morning, she and her colleagues listened to seminars of experienced doctors and presentations of new materials for work, and in the afternoon they went to the beach to sunbathe and swim. The sea climate and fresh air seemed to erase her worries from her mind. Linda thought about how she would return home, how she would tell Ray about the trip, how the 2 of them would go to the place where the malachite was mined. It's a shame Catherine isn't with me, the girl thought as she watched the waves. She said she hadn't been to the sea for a couple of years. Linda really wanted to share her peacefulness with her loved ones. After all, her colleagues were only colleagues. On the 3rd day, the organizers said that the last speaker couldn't come due to illness, apologized to the participants and informed them that the training was closed. Linda decided not to stay one more day in the hotel with the others, but bought a ticket on the same day and went home. Here's a surprise for Ray, I'll be home early. And with a tan too, she smiled as she looked out the window at the sea. The train arrived at its destination early in the morning. On the journey, Linda had a nice chat with her neighbor and her grandson of 9 years. Granny treated the girl to fruit and enjoyed listening to her stories about work, recalling her own youth. The morning city was just waking up, washed by the night rain. It was not as warm as the sea, and even a little fresh. Outside the window of the taxi passed sleepy alleys and early joggers. In the alleys, the first rays of sunshine dispersed the foggy remnants, played in the puddles and glimmered drops on bushes and tree branches. The taxi driver helped her unload her bag, wished her a good day, and drove off to his new passengers. Linda thought about how she would go up to the flat, go in quietly and get into bed with Ray asleep. How nice that today was her husband's day off and they would be able to sleep through lunch together, then make coffee and talk about the upcoming trip. Linda quietly turned the key in the lock so as not to wake Ray. Quietly she walked into the flat, and as soon as she saw the familiar corridor, she was dumbfounded. All the good cheer she'd brought with her from the sea had gone down and shattered into tiny pieces. Her heart pounded like the wheels of the train that had brought her back here. There were shoes lying in the corridor that she would have recognized out of 100. They'd bought them together last year and had picked up the last pair in town. The shoes were Catherine's. By the mirror, however, Linda saw her keys and the same painfully familiar car fob. For a moment, a childish, naive thought crept into her head. Maybe something's happened and Catherine's come to ask for help. But the thought was immediately suffocated by the falling curtain of obviousness. From the bedroom, Linda heard soft voices. It seemed to her that her heart was pounding so that the neighbors could hear her. The girl crept quietly to the door and froze, listening to what was going on behind it. I almost talked him into buying me the salon outright from Miranda. A familiar female voice sounded. Will you get a divorce as soon as the deal is official? The husband's voice answered him. The same day. When are you going to file the papers? I'm thinking of what to tell her, followed a sigh. The idea of a fake affair has failed. It failed because someone left their work phone at home, the woman's voice interrupted. I've been working her as hard as I can. A little bit more, and she would have filed for divorce herself. We would have come out dry. And now you either have to talk to her head on, or think of something else. In the forehead is a pity. I don't like her as a woman, but as a human being, I pity her. And it is not a pity to make a show, smirked a female voice. I choose the lesser of two evils, said the male voice. Linda clamped her hands over her mouth and felt the corners of her eyes grow wet. A wave of cold swept down her back, her cheeks felt hot, and her throat felt like it was being squeezed by invisible hands. Her realization fell in pieces, and each was nastier than the last. It burned, drained away all the good inside, like acid. Ray, you and I tried it back in college, but you were too right then, and I was too stupid. But if it had worked, then, Catherine's voice sounded quietly, but ingratiatingly, might not have been these long years with a bore from the dentist. My husband might not have been there, and now everything would be easier, and we'd be living somewhere abroad by now. If everything works out, it will Ray confirmed. We'll run the salon remotely. You run the salon and I'll run the agency. Linda felt the tears wet her t-shirt and imprinted hot drops on her chest. We'll be gone, and they might have something with Harry. I've seen the way he looks at her, he chuckled from behind the door. I've seen the way he looks at her. She's the perfect girl for Linda. She loves dumplings, borscht, and watching soap operas at night. She's always been a little short for you. She loves her job and doesn't like herself very much, said Ray. We live like neighbors. I'm tired of the homegirl who always has everything planned. I feel like an old man around her. I want something different. I know what you want, Ray. What do you want, Ray? Catherine cooed. From across the room there was a commotion. Linda sat against the wall outside the door, shaking with shame, pity, disgust, resentment, and betrayal of the two people she thought were closest to her, after her mother. The last bit of realization poured out. The cup was empty. The cold hands of reality finally closed around her throat. She jumped up and flung herself out of the flat in what she was wearing. The street, the morning, Linda ran away from the shame and disgrace she had lived in for so many years. She was disgusted with her own existence. She wanted to forget, to erase her memory. She wanted to go back 10 years, to pull her hand out of Catherine's fingers, to send the smug, insolent man to the dormitory. Every year that passed was like a rod whipping her in the back, leaving deep wounds and triple the pain that came on more and more. Tears welled up in her eyes. Everything was cloudy and barely recognizable. She stopped, breathed, and ran again. She was shouted at by passers-by, but Linda didn't hear, didn't see. She wanted to hide from this vile feeling, from herself. "Girl, look out," was the last shred of reality that imprinted itself on her memory before pain and darkness overrode her. The measured sounds of the PI snapped Linda out of oblivion. She also thought irritably, what was that nasty beeping sound like the trills of an electronic alarm clock from the past? Her eyes struggled to open, her body felt woozy, her right leg felt petrified and wouldn't move. My entire right side responded with painful tightening when I tried to turn around on the bed, and my head was buzzing. "Good morning. You're finally awake, Linda," greeted her by a woman in a white dressing gown. Linda looked around and only then realized she was in a hospital bed. What happened to me? She looked at the leg in a cast sticking out from under the blanket. "You were hit by a car. I'm surprised you got away with a broken leg, mild concussion, and moderate bruises," the doctor replied. Looking through the documents, they pick up other people in pieces in such cases. "You were born with your shirt on. Your family will be happy to know that you'll be well soon." Not all the family. Linda turned her back to the wall. "Is there someone coming to call your relatives?" the doctor asked. "Tell my husband I was hit by a car and I'm dead. I can't go back. I don't want to see him again, and I don't want to see her," Everlinda said, without turning round. The doctor shook her head. "If they come, don't let them in my room," Linda added. The hospital was dreary, but the walls with the red cross seemed to shield her from the painful thoughts of what had happened. The physical pain didn't seem to bother them much in the face of how much their souls were torn. Her mother rushed to the hospital half an hour after the call. She first cringed, then cursed, then cried at her daughter's bedside. Linda told her everything she had heard that morning. When Melissa left her daughter's room, she gave the nurses each a box of chocolates, and on pain of complaining to the head doctor, ordered her not to let anyone with names beginning with the letters R and K see her daughter. Linda blocked the numbers of her husband and the lying friend. She asked her mother and a colleague friend to collect her belongings from her husband's flat when he was away. Doctors said rehabilitation would take about 3 weeks and the fracture would finally heal in 3 months. One day there was a knock on the door of the room. Linda thought it was one of the staff, although they usually didn't bother to knock. "Come in," the girl shouted, not looking away from the magazine her mom had brought. "Hello, Linda," came a familiar voice. Harry stood in the doorway with a bouquet of flowers and a dressing gown thrown over his shoulders. Linda had mixed feelings when she saw her ex-girlfriend's husband. On the one hand, he reminded her of what had happened, but on the other hand, he had nothing to do with it. "You don't know how hard it took me to get here," the man complained, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "It's almost like they're checking IDs to get to you." "That's my request," Linda nodded. "Why? Are you hiding from someone?" Harry joked. "Maybe I am," the girl confirmed. Harry stared at her in surprise, his eyes wide with question and incomprehension. Linda exhaled and decided to tell him. She recalled everything, including Catherine's outings at the Institute, her consumerist attitude to men, and her hypocrisy under the mask of her friend. Harry listened with his mouth open. "I want you not to fall victim to their game like I did. Get a divorce soon and don't listen to any pleas. Don't you dare buy the salon. Catherine is using you and has used you. Linda's done." "Where did you?" A stunned Harry couldn't believe his ears. They talked about it for a long time. The girl asked the man not to tell anyone where she was or what was wrong with her, and not to do anything stupid that would ruin his life. Towards the end, when Harry was about to leave, he asked, "Linda, tell me, do I have a chance?" "Not now," she shook her head. "I want to be alone. Maybe, in the future, maybe." "I get it. Get well soon. I'll be stopping by if you don't mind." Harry nodded. "Come over." She blinked, showing agreement. Time goes differently in a small town than it does in a big city. It's measured and quiet. The hustle and bustle is alien to those who are used to getting up to the crowing of the rooster. A light frost touched the rowan berries, which shone brightly against the snow. The snow itself sparkled in the sunlight, still fresh and unmarred by anyone's feet and paws. "Granddaughter, there's a letter for you," Grandmother Emma shouted, coming into the hay and waving the envelopes. "Thank you," Linda shouted from the kitchen. She was preparing a simple breakfast for herself and Grandma. "It's been a long time since I've seen a letter," Grandma Emma said, sitting down on her stool. "You young people are all calling now. A letter from some fiancé." She handed Linda an envelope. She took a quick glance at the sender's name and decided to read it later. After her recovery, Linda went straight to her grandmother's house in the country. She could not stay in the city, where every street reminded her of the betrayal and shame she had experienced. She quit her job, settled other minor issues, and made her mother her representative in the divorce proceedings so that she would not have to face Ray again. "Out of sight, out of mind," her mother said as she saw her off. "Go as far as you like and come back as often as you like. Only call me often." It was quiet in the village, where the pain began to subside and gradually recede. Time was doing its work healing the wounded soul. Her mother didn't talk about Ray and the divorce, only promised to tell me when it was all over. The envelope had an address and Harry's name on it. How he knew where to find her remained a mystery. Linda ran her eyes over the lines Harry had written about the divorce, about leaving Catherine with almost nothing. She consciously skipped that part of the letter. "Dear Linda, I realize I'm probably an extra person in your life, but since that evening in the cafe, you haven't left my mind. I've made a lot of mistakes and missed a lot of chances, but I don't want to let you go." The girl paused, listening to herself. Something faintly trembled in her after those words. "I'm willing to wait as long as you say. I hope for a reply, Harry." Linda folded the letter, tucked it away in an envelope, and began to twirl it in her hands. If she was still in doubt at the hospital, she knew for sure now. Grandma Emma came into the room. "Do you think what to write back?" questioned the old woman, looking at the concentrated face of her granddaughter. "I think that old admirers are not invited to a new life," Linda smiled at her grandmother as she tore open the envelope. She tossed the scraps into the bin and looked out the window. "Grandma, the neighbors here probably to ask about Daisy again. They're so restless. They'll heal the animal." The old woman shook her hands and shuffled into the hay.